Close your eyes and picture a map of the world. Now watch as the borders shift and change, empires rise and fall, and one civilization endures through it all. This is the story of China, a land that has seen more change and continuity than perhaps any other on Earth. In this journey, we are going to bring that map to life as we trace the expansion and contraction of Chinese territory, the spread of its culture, and the evolution of its society over 5,000 years. Our journey through the vast tapestry of Chinese history begins in the misty depths of prehistory, along the fertile banks of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Here, over 5,000 years ago, the first seeds of Chinese civilization took root. These mighty waters, winding through the heart of what would become China, provided the perfect conditions for early human settlements to flourish. The rivers brought rich silt that created some of the most fertile soil on Earth, while their waters supported both agriculture and transportation. As we step back in time, we encounter the Peking man, a species of Homo erectus that lived in the region around 750,000 years ago. These ancient ancestors left behind stone tools and evidence of fire use, hinting at the first glimmers of human ingenuity in the land that would become China. Archaeological excavations near Beijing have revealed that these early humans lived in caves, used primitive tools for hunting and gathering, and had begun to harness the power of fire for cooking and warmth. Their discovery represents one of the most significant finds in understanding early human development in East Asia. But it was the Neolithic period, beginning around 10,000 BCE, that truly set the stage for the rise of Chinese civilization. During this transformative era, nomadic hunter-gatherers began settling into permanent communities, marking the beginning of agricultural society in China. The transition from a nomadic lifestyle to settled farming communities represented a fundamental shift that would shape Chinese culture for millennia to come. The Yangshao culture, emerging around 5000 BCE, marked a significant leap forward in human development along the Yellow River. These early farmers cultivated millet, creating stable food sources that allowed their populations to grow and their societies to become more complex. They crafted exquisite painted pottery, adorned with intricate geometric patterns and stylized animals, showcasing an artistic sensibility that would influence Chinese aesthetics for thousands of years. The pottery of the Yangshao people featured distinctive red and black designs, often depicting fish, birds, and human faces, revealing not just artistic skill, but also the spiritual beliefs of these ancient communities. The Yangshao people lived in small villages, their homes dug partially into the ground for insulation against harsh winters and scorching summers. These pit houses, as archaeologists call them, were often circular or rectangular, with thatched roofs and central hearths for cooking and warmth. The villages were typically situated near rivers or streams, ensuring access to fresh water and fertile soil for their crops. This settlement pattern laid the groundwork for the agricultural lifestyle that would become central to Chinese civilization. As time marched on, the Longshan culture arose around 3000 BCE, building upon the foundations laid by their Yangshao predecessors. The Longshan people introduced new technologies and social structures that would prove crucial to the development of Chinese civilization. They created fine black pottery, so thin and delicate it is often called eggshell pottery, demonstrating advanced craftsmanship that required sophisticated kiln technology and exceptional skill. This pottery was not merely functional, but represented a significant artistic achievement, with some pieces featuring walls less than 1 millimeter thick. More importantly, the Longshan people began to build walled settlements, a sign of growing social complexity and the increasing need for defense against rival groups. These walls, constructed from rammed earth, represented a major technological and social advancement, requiring coordinated labor and suggesting the emergence of organized leadership. The Longshan culture also showed evidence of social stratification, with some burials containing elaborate grave goods while others were quite simple, indicating the development of class distinctions that would later characterize Chinese imperial society. These early societies were not just advancing technologically, they were also developing the spiritual and philosophical underpinnings that would shape Chinese culture for thousands of years. Ancestor worship, a practice that would remain central to Chinese spiritual life well into the modern era, likely began during this period. The people of ancient China saw their ancestors as powerful spirits who could influence the world of the living, a belief that would later evolve into complex systems of ritual and remembrance. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Longshan people practiced divination, possibly using animal bones or shells to communicate with the spiritual world, a practice that would eventually develop into the sophisticated oracle bone system of later dynasties. As we move closer to the dawn of recorded history, we encounter the semi-legendary figures who occupy the misty borderlands between myth and historical fact. Fuxi, the legendary first emperor, is said to have taught his people how to fish with nets, hunt with weapons, and domesticate animals. Shennong, the divine farmer, supposedly introduced agriculture and herbal medicine, establishing the foundation for Chinese traditional medicine. And then there is the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, credited with inventing everything from writing to pottery to the principles of governance that would guide Chinese rulers for centuries. While we cannot be certain these figures ever existed as individuals, they represented the collective memory of a time when Chinese society was becoming increasingly sophisticated. The stories told about them reflect real advancements: the development of agriculture, the emergence of writing systems, and the creation of social hierarchies that would eventually lead to dynastic rule. Around 2000 BCE, as we stand on the cusp of China's Bronze Age, we can see the foundations of a unique civilization taking shape. The people of ancient China had mastered silk production, a technology that would later connect them to the wider world through the famous Silk Road trade networks. They had developed sophisticated jade carving techniques, creating objects of both practical use and ritual significance that would become symbols of Chinese culture. And they had begun to create the complex social and political structures that would evolve into China's famous bureaucratic system, a governmental approach that would influence administration across East Asia for thousands of years. The transition from prehistoric societies to the dawn of Chinese civilization, as we know it, represents one of history's most fascinating transformations. According to ancient texts like the Records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, the Xia dynasty was founded by the legendary figure Yu the Great. Yu's claim to fame lies in his heroic efforts in controlling catastrophic floods that threatened the early agricultural communities along the Yellow River. This tale of Yu's flood control is more than just a story. It symbolizes the early Chinese belief in the ruler's duty to maintain harmony between humanity and nature, a concept that would shape Chinese philosophy for millennia to come. The legend tells us that Yu spent 13 years taming the floods, personally leading the effort to dredge rivers and build canals. Unlike his predecessor Gun, who attempted to contain the floods with dikes and barriers, Yu chose to work with the natural flow of water, channeling it through carefully constructed waterways. This approach reflects a profound understanding of natural forces that would become central to Chinese thought, influencing everything from military strategy to architectural design. Yu's greatest legacy, however, may have been the establishment of hereditary rule. This marked a crucial shift from tribal leadership to a centralized monarchical system, laying the groundwork for the dynastic cycle that would define Chinese history for the next 4,000 years. The Xia dynasty, if it existed as described in later texts, represented the first step towards the complex political structures that would eventually evolve into China's famous bureaucratic system. But here's where things get particularly intriguing. While historical records of the Xia are sparse, archaeologists have made discoveries that tantalizingly hint at its possible existence. The Erlitou site in Henan province has revealed evidence of an advanced Bronze Age culture, including palatial structures, sophisticated bronze tools, and exquisite jade artifacts. Some scholars associate these findings with the legendary Xia dynasty, though the debate remains far from settled among historians and archaeologists. What's particularly fascinating about the Erlitou culture is the sudden appearance of highly sophisticated bronze artifacts around 1700 BCE. This marks a significant technological leap from the Neolithic period we explored earlier, raising intriguing questions about the pace and nature of technological development in ancient China. How did ancient Chinese artisans master the complex process of bronze casting so quickly and with such remarkable skill? The answer may lie in a hidden connection between metallurgy and agricultural practices that could rewrite our understanding of early Chinese technology. Recent research suggests that early farming communities played a crucial role in the development of metalworking techniques. The same organizational skills and resource management required for successful agriculture may have been applied to the complex process of mining, smelting, and casting metal. This theory challenges our traditional view of technological advancement as a linear progression and instead points to a more interconnected development of various skills and technologies. The agricultural communities had already mastered the control of fire for pottery making, understood the properties of different earth materials, and developed sophisticated timing and coordination skills for seasonal farming. These same skills translated remarkably well to the demands of bronze production, which required precise temperature control, knowledge of ore properties, and coordinated team efforts. The society of the purported Xia dynasty, as gleaned from both legend and archaeological evidence, appears to have been increasingly hierarchical. We see the emergence of distinct classes including nobles, skilled artisans, warriors, and farmers, indicating early forms of social stratification that would become more pronounced in later dynasties. This complexity is reflected in the artifacts found at sites like Erlitou, bronze vessels, weapons, and ceremonial objects that would have been symbols of power and prestige. The bronze vessels in particular reveal sophisticated artistic sensibilities, with intricate designs that combine geometric patterns with stylized animal motifs. These weren't merely functional objects, but statements of status and spiritual power, often used in elaborate ritual ceremonies that reinforced social hierarchies. The craftsmanship required to create these pieces suggests the existence of specialized workshops and a class of highly skilled metalworkers who devoted their entire lives to perfecting their art. The weapons found at these sites tell another story entirely, one of organized warfare and military hierarchy. Bronze axes, daggers, and spearheads show advanced metallurgical knowledge and suggest that control over bronze production was closely tied to military and political power. While the historical reality of the Xia dynasty remains uncertain, its legendary status serves a crucial purpose in Chinese cultural memory. It acts as a bridge between the mythical age of culture heroes like Fuxi and Shennong and the more firmly historical Shang dynasty that would follow. The stories of the Xia, whether based on a real dynasty or a compilation of various early Bronze Age cultures, profoundly influenced how later dynasties justified their rule through concepts like the mandate of heaven. This concept would become central to Chinese political thought, establishing the idea that legitimate rulers must possess moral virtue and divine approval. The transition from the Xia to the Shang was explained in later texts as a result of the last Xia king's moral corruption, setting a pattern that would be repeated throughout Chinese history. As the myths and legends surrounding the Xia dynasty begin to clear, we find ourselves on much firmer historical ground with the emergence of the Shang dynasty around 1600 BCE. This marks a truly pivotal moment in Chinese history, the transition from the shadowy realms of myth to the bright light of recorded history. The Shang dynasty stands as the earliest Chinese kingdom for which we have indisputable archaeological evidence, thanks in large part to the discovery of oracle bones. These oracle bones, primarily composed of ox scapulae and turtle plastrons, serve as both a window into Shang society and the birthplace of Chinese writing. Inscribed with questions to the gods and ancestral spirits, these artifacts reveal a society deeply rooted in divination and ancestor worship. The Shang kings, serving as intermediaries between the earthly and spiritual realms, would heat these bones until they cracked, interpreting the patterns to divine the future. This practice not only sheds light on Shang religious beliefs, but also provides us with the earliest examples of Chinese characters, a writing system that would evolve over millennia into the complex logographic script used today. The Shang established their capital at Yin, near modern Danyang in Henan province, creating the first true Chinese city and setting the stage for the urban civilization that would follow. The archaeological excavations at Anyang have revealed far more than just remnants of ancient civilization. They have uncovered a sophisticated urban center that represents one of humanity's earliest examples of complex city planning and social organization. The impressive palatial complexes discovered at this site stretch across vast areas their foundations still clearly visible after more than 3 millennia. These structures were not merely buildings but monuments to power, designed to awe and intimidate all who approached them. The workshops scattered throughout the site tell the story of specialized craftsmen who dedicated their entire lives to perfecting their trades, creating objects of stunning beauty and technical precision. The ritual sites, with their carefully arranged ceremonial platforms and sacrificial pits, reveal the profound spiritual dimension of Shang society. The layout of the city itself reflects a society with crystal, clear social stratification, where every person knew their place in the cosmic order. The royal palace and temples occupied the highest ground, literally and figuratively above all else, their elevated position symbolizing the divine nature of royal authority. Surrounding these sacred spaces were the residences of nobles and artisans, each dwelling carefully positioned to reflect its owner's status in the social hierarchy. Finally, on the outskirts of the city lay the humble dwellings of commoners, farmers, and laborers who formed the foundation of Shang society. One of the most striking aspects of Shang civilization was their extraordinary mastery of bronze metallurgy, a technological achievement that would define Chinese craftsmanship for centuries to come. The bronze artifacts unearthed from Shang sites showcase a level of technological sophistication that was truly unparalleled in the ancient world of their time. These weren't simple tools hammered out by village blacksmiths, but complex creations requiring advanced knowledge of chemistry, metallurgy, and artistic design. Ritual vessels, often adorned with intricate designs of mythical creatures and mesmerizing geometric patterns, served both religious and social functions in ways that modern observers can barely comprehend. These bronzes were far more than merely functional objects in daily life. They were powerful symbols of authority and prestige, their possession tightly controlled by the Shang elite who understood that controlling these symbols meant controlling society itself. The production of these magnificent bronze artifacts required a remarkably complex system of resource management and skilled labor that spanned vast distances. Copper, tin, and lead had to be mined from remote locations, transported across dangerous terrain, and smelted using techniques that demanded significant organization and technological knowledge. This level of metallurgical expertise raises absolutely fascinating questions about the speed of technological advancement in ancient China. How did the Shang achieve such remarkable mastery over bronze working in what appears to be a relatively short historical period? The answer might lie in an unexpected connection between agricultural practices and metalworking techniques that researchers are only now beginning to understand. Recent groundbreaking research suggests that the organizational skills and resource management capabilities required for successful large-scale agriculture may have been absolutely crucial in developing and scaling up metal production. The ability to coordinate large groups of people, manage resources efficiently across seasons, and innovate in farming techniques could have directly translated to revolutionary advancements in metallurgy. This theory fundamentally challenges our traditional view of technological progress as a simple linear process, instead pointing to a much more interconnected development of various skills and technologies in ancient societies. The Shang society was intensely hierarchical, with the king positioned at the absolute apex, serving as both supreme political leader and chief religious authority. Below him in this carefully structured system were the nobles, warriors, skilled artisans, and hardworking farmers, each group with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. This rigid social structure was constantly reinforced through elaborate rituals and ceremonies, many of which centered around the deeply important practice of ancestor worship. The Shang firmly believed that their royal ancestors continued to hold tremendous sway over the fortunes of the living, necessitating regular sacrifices and complex divination ceremonies to maintain their divine favor. Warfare played an absolutely significant role in Shang society, as clearly evidenced by the numerous sophisticated weapons found in archaeological sites throughout their former territory. The Shang armies, equipped with advanced bronze weapons and utilizing horse-drawn chariots, were truly a formidable military force that dominated the ancient Chinese landscape. They engaged in frequent conflicts with surrounding tribes, both to expand their territorial control and capture prisoners for use in ritual sacrifice to their ancestors. As the Shang dynasty's power began to wane under the pressure of internal corruption and external threats, a new force emerged on the historical horizon. Around 1046 BCE, the Zhou people, who had once served as vassals of the mighty Shang, rose up to challenge their former overlords in a dramatic confrontation. Led by the determined King Wu, the Zhou forces defeated the last Shang king at the pivotal Battle of Mai, ushering in a completely new era of Chinese history. The Zhou dynasty, which would remarkably become the longest-lasting dynasty in all of Chinese history, had officially begun its reign. The Zhou introduced a truly revolutionary concept that would profoundly shape Chinese political thought for millennia to come, known as the Mandate of Heaven. This groundbreaking idea proposed that the right to rule was granted by divine authority, but it wasn't an unconditional gift bestowed forever. If a ruler became corrupt, oppressive, or failed to govern justly and wisely, the mandate could be withdrawn by heaven itself and passed to a more worthy leader. This powerful concept provided crucial philosophical justification for the Zhou's dramatic overthrow of the Shang, and would later be used repeatedly to legitimize dynastic changes throughout the long sweep of Chinese history. Under Zhou rule, China operated under a sophisticated feudal system where the king strategically distributed land to nobles and vassals in exchange for their unwavering loyalty and military support. This decentralized system led to a complex political structure with power spread across numerous semi-autonomous states, each maintaining its own local customs and governance. While this arrangement initially provided remarkable stability and allowed for local adaptation, it would eventually contribute to the dynasty's eventual downfall as regional powers grew stronger and more independent over time. The autumn of 771 BCE marked a turning point that would echo through Chinese history for centuries. Nomadic invaders swept down from the northern steppes and sacked the Zhou capital, forcing the royal court to flee eastward to the city of Luoyang. This catastrophic event marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, spanning from 770 to 256 BCE, and initiated a gradual but irreversible decline in the central authority of the Zhou kings. The Eastern Zhou era unfolded in two distinct phases, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities for Chinese civilization. The first phase, known as the Spring and Autumn period from 770 to 476 BCE, witnessed the slow fragmentation of Zhou authority as regional lords grew increasingly independent. The second phase, the Warring States period from 475 to 221 BCE, saw this fragmentation accelerate into open warfare between competing kingdoms, each seeking to claim the mandate of heaven for themselves. During these turbulent centuries, the once mighty Zhou realm transformed into a complex patchwork of rival states, each developing its own military strategies, diplomatic alliances, and administrative systems. Yet paradoxically, this era of political chaos gave birth to one of the most intellectually fertile periods in all of Chinese history. The breakdown of centralized authority created an unprecedented environment where new ideas could flourish without the constraints of rigid orthodoxy. This was the legendary age of the 100 schools of thought, when brilliant philosophers emerged to grapple with fundamental questions about governance, morality, and human nature. Confucius, born Kongqiu in 551 BCE, developed his revolutionary philosophy during this period of uncertainty and change. His emphasis on moral cultivation, proper social relationships, and meritocracy in government would profoundly shape Chinese society for thousands of years to come. Confucian ideals promoted the concept of the Junzi, or exemplary person, who leads through moral example rather than brute force. Meanwhile, Laozi's Taoist philosophy offered a compelling counterpoint to Confucian thought, emphasizing harmony with nature and the concept of wu-wei, or non-action. Taoism taught that the wise ruler governs by following the natural order, allowing things to unfold according to their inherent patterns rather than forcing artificial solutions. Other influential thinkers like Mozi promoted universal love and practical governance, while legalist philosophers like Han Feizi argued for strict laws and harsh punishments as the foundation of effective rule. This intellectual ferment created a rich philosophical tradition that would continue to influence Chinese thought throughout its history. The Eastern Zhou period also witnessed remarkable technological advancements that transformed both agriculture and warfare. The widespread adoption of iron tools revolutionized farming practices, allowing peasants to cultivate previously unworkable land and increase crop yields dramatically. Sophisticated irrigation systems, including canals and dikes, expanded the amount of arable land and supported growing populations in key agricultural regions. In the military sphere, innovations proceeded at a rapid pace as competing states sought technological advantages over their rivals. The invention of the crossbow fundamentally changed battlefield tactics, providing infantry with a powerful weapon that could penetrate armor at considerable distances. Advances in siege warfare technology, including catapults, battering rams, and sophisticated scaling equipment, allowed armies to conquer heavily fortified cities that had previously been impregnable. As the Warring States period progressed, warfare became increasingly intense and sophisticated, with large armies clashing in epic battles involving tens of thousands of soldiers. This period produced legendary military strategists like Sun Tzu, whose treatise, The Art of War, remains influential in military and business circles to this day. Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and strategic deception represented a new level of sophistication in military thinking. Despite the gradual erosion of Zhou authority, the dynasty's cultural and political legacy endured, providing continuity amid the chaos of constant warfare. The Zhou period had established many fundamental aspects of Chinese culture, including the emphasis on ancestor worship, the use of the mandate of heaven to justify political authority, and the development of sophisticated bureaucratic systems. As the Warring States period reached its climax, one state began to emerge as the dominant power, Qin. The success of the Qin state can be traced to a series of radical reforms implemented by Shang Yang, a legalist philosopher who served as chancellor to King Xiao. These reforms emphasized strict laws, harsh punishments, and a meritocratic bureaucracy that rewarded achievement rather than birth. The Qin state became a formidable military machine, capable of mobilizing vast armies and resources with unprecedented efficiency. This administrative prowess, combined with strategic alliances and ruthless tactics, allowed Qin to gradually conquer its rivals one by one. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang, the ambitious ruler of the Qin state, accomplished what many thought impossible. He defeated the last of his rivals and declared himself the first emperor of a unified China. This pivotal moment marked the end of centuries of division and the birth of imperial China as we know it. Once in power, Qin Shi Huang set about transforming China into a centralized empire through a series of sweeping reforms. He abolished the feudal system that had characterized the Zhou dynasty, dividing the empire into 36 commanderies governed by appointed officials rather than hereditary nobles. This administrative reorganization laid the foundation for China's imperial bureaucracy, a system that would endure for over 2 millennia. One of Qin Shi Huang's most lasting legacies was the standardization of various aspects of Chinese society. He unified the diverse writing systems of the conquered states into a single script, which became the basis for modern Chinese characters and facilitated communication across the vast empire. Weights, measures, and even the width of cart axles were standardized, facilitating trade and enabling the efficient movement of goods and armies. A new system of coinage replaced the various forms of currency that had circulated in different states, creating a unified economic system. These standardization efforts represented an unprecedented attempt to create cultural and administrative unity across a vast and diverse territory. The collapse of the mighty Han dynasty in 220 CE marked the beginning of one of the most tumultuous yet culturally rich periods in Chinese history. What followed was not a simple succession of dynasties, but rather a complex era of division, warfare, and eventual reunification that would span nearly 4 centuries. This period, often called the Age of Fragmentation, would test the very foundations of Chinese civilization while simultaneously giving birth to some of its greatest cultural achievements. The immediate aftermath of Han's fall saw China split into 3 competing kingdoms, each claiming legitimacy as the true heir to the Han legacy. The Kingdom of Wei controlled the northern heartland, including the vital Yellow River Valley and the former Han capital of Luoyang. To the south, the Kingdom of Wu established its power base in the fertile Yangtze River region, taking advantage of the area's natural defenses and agricultural wealth. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Shu carved out a domain in the southwestern mountains of modern-day Sichuan province, using the region's difficult terrain as protection against its more powerful neighbors. This 3 Wei division became immortalized in Chinese literature through the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, an epic tale that transformed historical figures like Liu Bei, Cao Cao, and Sun Quan into legendary heroes whose exploits continue to captivate audiences today. The reality of this period was far more complex than the romanticized stories suggest, involving constant diplomatic maneuvering, shifting alliances, and devastating military campaigns that left much of northern China depopulated and economically ruined. By 280 CE, the Western Jin dynasty managed to briefly reunify China, but this unity proved fragile and short-lived. The devastating War of the Eight Princes, a brutal succession struggle among members of the imperial family, weakened the dynasty beyond repair. More catastrophically, the invasion of nomadic peoples from the northern steppes, collectively known as the Five Barbarians, shattered Chinese control over the north. These invasions forced the Jin court to flee southward in 317 CE, establishing what became known as the Eastern Jin dynasty in modern day Nanjing. This marked the beginning of the Northern and Southern Dynasties period, a time when China remained divided along roughly geographical lines for nearly 3 centuries. Paradoxically, this era of political fragmentation witnessed an extraordinary flowering of Chinese culture, philosophy, and religious thought. The constant warfare and political instability led many intellectuals to question traditional Confucian values and seek alternative sources of meaning and comfort. Buddhism, which had been slowly gaining followers since its introduction during the Han Dynasty, experienced explosive growth during this period of uncertainty. The religion's emphasis on suffering, impermanence, and the possibility of transcendence resonated deeply with people living through constant upheaval and loss. Buddhist monasteries became centers of learning, preserving classical texts, and promoting literacy even as secular institutions crumbled around them. The period also saw the rise of Taoism as an organized religion, building upon the philosophical foundations laid by Laozi and Zhuangzi centuries earlier. Taoist practitioners developed elaborate rituals, alchemical practices, and mystical techniques aimed at achieving immortality and harmony with the natural world. This religious Taoism provided another alternative to the political chaos of the times, offering followers a path to spiritual fulfillment that existed independent of worldly power structures. The arts flourished remarkably during this period, perhaps as a form of escapism from the harsh realities of political life. Poetry reached new heights of sophistication and emotional depth, with writers like Tao Yuanming crafting verses that celebrated the simple pleasures of rural life and the beauty of the natural world. Calligraphy evolved into a highly refined art form, with masters like Wang Zhizhi developing styles that would influence Chinese writing for centuries to come. Painting also advanced significantly, moving beyond simple decorative functions to become a means of expressing philosophical ideas and emotional states. The long period of division finally came to an end in 589 CE when Yangjian, founder of the Sui dynasty, successfully conquered the south and reunified China under a single ruler. The Sui dynasty, though short-lived like the earlier Qin, accomplished several crucial tasks that laid the groundwork for future prosperity. Most importantly, the Sui emperors undertook massive infrastructure projects that reconnected the divided regions of China. The Grand Canal, an engineering marvel that linked the Yellow and Yangtze river systems, facilitated trade and communication between north and south on an unprecedented scale. This waterway allowed grain from the fertile south to feed the political centers of the north, while enabling the efficient movement of troops and officials throughout the empire. The Sui also rebuilt and expanded the Great Wall, restored the capital at Chang'an to its former glory, and re-established the imperial examination system that had been disrupted during the centuries of division. However, like the Qin before them, the Sui emperors' ambitious projects came at enormous human cost, leading to widespread rebellion and the dynasty's collapse in 618 CE. From the ashes of Sui's fall arose the Tang dynasty, which would preside over what many consider the golden age of Chinese civilization. The Tang emperors learned from their predecessors' mistakes, pursuing expansion and cultural development while maintaining more sustainable policies toward their subjects. Under Tang rule, China became the most powerful and cosmopolitan empire in the world, with its capital Chang'an serving as a magnet for merchants, diplomats, and scholars from across Asia. The Tang period saw the full flowering of Buddhism in China, with magnificent temples and monasteries constructed throughout the empire and Chinese pilgrims like Xuanzang traveling to India to study Buddhist scriptures at their source. This era also marked the high point of the Silk Road trade network, with Chinese goods, ideas, and cultural practices spreading far beyond the empire's borders, while foreign influences enriched Chinese civilization in return. The cycles of division and reunification that characterized this period established patterns that would repeat throughout Chinese history, demonstrating both the resilience of Chinese civilization and the constant tension between unity and fragmentation that would continue to shape the nation's development for centuries to come. The Song dynasty emerged from the ashes of division in 960 CE, ushering in one of the most remarkable periods of innovation and cultural achievement in Chinese history. Unlike previous dynasties that relied primarily on military conquest and territorial expansion, the Song chose a different path, focusing on technological advancement, economic development, and cultural refinement. This strategic shift would transform China into the world's most advanced civilization, producing innovations that wouldn't appear in Europe for centuries. The Song period represented a true renaissance of Chinese civilization, marked by unprecedented technological breakthroughs that revolutionized daily life. The invention of movable type printing around 1040 CE democratized knowledge, allowing books to be produced more efficiently and spreading literacy throughout the empire. This innovation preceded Gutenberg's printing press by over 400 years, fundamentally changing how information was preserved and transmitted across generations. The Song also perfected the art of papermaking, producing high-quality paper that became a valuable export commodity along the Silk Road. Perhaps even more transformative was the Song mastery of gunpowder, originally discovered during the Tang dynasty for alchemical purposes. Song engineers developed sophisticated weapons including fire arrows, primitive cannons, and explosive bombs that revolutionized warfare. These military innovations gave Chinese forces significant advantages against nomadic invaders, though they would later prove insufficient against the disciplined Mongol war machine. The magnetic compass, another Song innovation, enabled more accurate navigation and contributed to China's maritime expansion during this period. Song artisans also perfected porcelain production, creating ceramics so fine and beautiful that they became known worldwide simply as China. These technological achievements weren't isolated discoveries, but part of a broader culture of innovation encouraged by the Song government's investment in education and research. The Song dynasty presided over an economic boom that transformed Chinese society from its agricultural foundations into a more complex, commercialized economy. The introduction of paper money, the world's first government-issued currency, facilitated long-distance trade and reduced the logistical challenges of transporting heavy metal coins. This monetary innovation reflected the Song's sophisticated understanding of economics and their willingness to experiment with new financial instruments. Urban centers flourished as never before, with cities like Kaifeng and Hangzhou becoming cosmopolitan metropolises that amazed foreign visitors with their size and sophistication. The capital of Kaifeng housed over 1 million residents, making it the world's largest city at the time, complete with paved streets, public baths, and elaborate entertainment districts. Markets buzzed with activity as merchants traded goods from across Asia, while restaurants, theaters, and tea houses provided entertainment for the growing middle class. The Song period saw the emergence of a merchant class that gained social respectability and economic influence previously reserved for scholars and government officials. Agricultural innovations, including new rice varieties from Southeast Asia and improved farming techniques, supported this urban growth by increasing food production. The development of water-powered machinery for textile production and grain processing demonstrated the Song commitment to mechanization and efficiency. These economic transformations created a level of prosperity and social mobility that wouldn't be matched again in China for centuries. Despite their technological and economic achievements, the Song dynasty faced an existential threat from the north in the form of the Mongol Empire. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols had conquered vast territories stretching from Eastern Europe to Central Asia, creating the largest contiguous empire in human history. The Mongol military machine, built around superior cavalry tactics, psychological warfare, and the strategic use of conquered populations proved unstoppable against traditional Chinese defensive strategies. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, completed the conquest of China in 1279 CE, establishing the Yuan dynasty and becoming the first foreign ruler to control all of China. The Mongol conquest represented a fundamental shift in Chinese civilization, as foreign rulers imposed their own administrative systems while adapting to Chinese governmental traditions. Kublai Khan established his capital at Dadu, modern-day Beijing, marking the beginning of that city's role as China's political center. The Yuan dynasty maintained the Chinese bureaucratic system while incorporating Mongol nobles into positions of power, creating a complex hierarchy that often favored foreigners over native Chinese. Despite initial resistance, the Mongol rulers eventually adopted many Chinese customs and practices, demonstrating the assimilative power of Chinese civilization even under foreign rule. The Yuan period saw increased cultural exchange along the Silk Road as the Mongol Empire's vast network facilitated trade and communication between East and West. Marco Polo's famous journey to China during this period exemplified the cosmopolitan nature of Yuan society and the opportunities for cultural exchange under Mongol rule. The Yuan dynasty's rule came to an end in 1368 when Zhu Wanzhang, a peasant rebel leader, successfully drove out the Mongols and established the Ming dynasty. The Ming Restoration represented a conscious effort to revive traditional Chinese values and institutions while rejecting foreign influences that had accumulated during the Yuan period. Emperor Hongwu, as Zhu Wanzhang became known, implemented sweeping reforms designed to strengthen imperial control and prevent the corruption that had weakened previous dynasties. The Ming capital was initially established at Nanjing, but Emperor Yongle later moved it to Beijing, where he commissioned the construction of the magnificent Forbidden City. This architectural masterpiece, completed in 1420, served as the imperial palace for both Ming and Qing emperors and remains one of the world's most impressive palace complexes. The early Ming period was marked by remarkable maritime expeditions led by the Muslim Admiral Zheng He between 1405 and 1433. These massive fleets, comprising hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of crew members, reached Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and the eastern coast of Africa. Zheng He's treasure ships, some reportedly over 400 feet long, dwarfed European vessels of the same period and demonstrated China's advanced shipbuilding capabilities. These expeditions established Chinese influence throughout the Indian Ocean and brought exotic goods, tribute, and knowledge back to China. However, the costs of these expeditions and changing political priorities led to their discontinuation, marking a turning point toward isolationism that would characterize later Chinese foreign policy. The Ming dynasty's eventual turn inward represented a missed opportunity for China to establish a global maritime empire centuries before European colonial expansion. The collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912 marked the end of over 2 millennia of imperial rule in China, ushering in an era of unprecedented transformation and upheaval. The Republic of China, established under Sun Yat-sen's leadership, faced immediate challenges that would define the next century of Chinese history. The early Republican period was characterized by political fragmentation as regional warlords carved up the country into competing territories. These military strongmen controlled local resources and armies, making national unity nearly impossible to achieve. The May 4th movement of 1919 emerged as a pivotal moment in modern Chinese intellectual history, sparked by anger over the Treaty of Versailles' decision to grant former German concessions in China to Japan. Students and intellectuals demanded political reform, cultural modernization, and the adoption of science and democracy as guiding principles. This movement catalyzed a generation of Chinese thinkers who would shape the country's future, including future Communist Party leaders like Mao Zedong. The 1920s and 1930s witnessed the emergence of two dominant political forces that would struggle for control of China. The Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek after Sun Yat-sen's death, sought to establish a modern, centralized republic based on Western democratic principles. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921, advocated for revolutionary change based on Marxist-Leninist ideology adapted to Chinese conditions. Initially, these parties cooperated in the United Front against warlordism, but their alliance collapsed in 1927 when Chiang Kai-shek launched a violent purge against communist members. This betrayal led to decades of civil war interrupted only by the Japanese invasion of 1937, which forced an uneasy truce between the two sides. The Second Sino-Japanese War, lasting from 1937 to 1945, devastated China and fundamentally altered its political landscape. Japanese forces occupied major cities and industrial centers, committing horrific atrocities including the rape of Nanjing, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were massacred. The war weakened the nationalist government while strengthening communist forces, who employed guerrilla tactics and built support among peasants in rural areas. When Japan surrendered in 1945, full-scale civil war resumed between the nationalists and communists, ultimately resulting in communist victory in 1949. Mao Zedong's proclamation of the People's Republic of China on October 1, 1949, marked the beginning of radical social and economic transformation. The Communist Party implemented sweeping land reforms that redistributed property from landlords to peasants, fundamentally altering China's traditional social structure. The Great Leap Forward campaign of 1958-1962 attempted to rapidly industrialize China through mass mobilization and backyard steel furnaces, but resulted in economic disaster and widespread famine that killed millions. The Cultural Revolution, launched by Mao in 1966, aimed to eliminate traditional culture and bourgeois elements from Chinese society. Red Guards, consisting mainly of young students, destroyed historical artifacts, persecuted intellectuals, and attacked anyone deemed insufficiently revolutionary. This decade-long upheaval severely damaged China's educational system, cultural heritage, and social fabric, leaving deep scars that persist today. Despite these traumatic experiences, the communist period also achieved significant accomplishments, including improved literacy rates, basic healthcare provision, and infrastructure development. Following Mao's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping emerged as China's paramount leader and initiated the reform and opening up policy in 1978. This pragmatic approach abandoned ideological purity in favor of economic development, famously summarized by Deng's statement that it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Special economic zones were established along the coast, allowing foreign investment and market mechanisms to operate alongside the planned economy. Agricultural reforms dismantled people's communes and returned land use rights to individual farmers, dramatically increasing productivity and rural incomes. The 1989 Tiananmen Square protests represented a critical moment when students and citizens demanded greater political freedom and an end to corruption. The government's violent suppression of these demonstrations highlighted the tension between economic liberalization and political control that continues to define modern China. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, China experienced unprecedented economic growth, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and becoming the world's manufacturing hub. China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001 accelerated its integration into the global economy and transformed it into the world's second-largest economy. The 2008 Beijing Olympics showcased China's emergence as a modern, confident nation capable of organizing spectacular international events. Under Xi Jinping's leadership since 2012, China has pursued the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure and investment program spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe. This ambitious project aims to recreate ancient Silk Road trade networks while extending Chinese influence globally. Domestically, China faces challenges including environmental degradation, an aging population, income inequality, and the need to transition from export-driven to consumption-based growth. The COVID-19 pandemic, which originated in Wuhan in late 2019, tested China's governance systems and highlighted both the strengths and weaknesses of its centralized political model. China's rapid response and eventual control of the virus demonstrated its administrative capacity, while initial cover-up attempts revealed ongoing transparency issues. Today, China stands as a global superpower with growing influence in international affairs, advanced technology capabilities, and ambitious goals for the future. The Chinese dream, as articulated by current leadership, envisions national rejuvenation and prosperity by 2049, marking the centennial of the People's Republic. From the ashes of imperial collapse to the heights of modern economic power, China's transformation over the past century represents one of history's most dramatic national revivals. The year 581 CE marked a pivotal moment in Chinese history when Yang Jian, later known as Emperor Wen of Sui, seized power and embarked on an ambitious mission to reunify a China that had been fractured for over 3 centuries. The Sui dynasty, though lasting merely 37 years, would prove to be one of the most transformative periods in Chinese civilization, serving as the crucial bridge between the chaotic era of division and the magnificent Tang Golden Age that would follow. Emperor Wen's rise to power was both calculated and opportunistic. As a high-ranking official in the northern Zhou court, he had married into the imperial family and gradually accumulated influence through strategic alliances and careful political maneuvering. When the young northern Zhou emperor died in 580 CE, Yang Jian acted swiftly as regent, consolidating power before formally establishing the Sui dynasty the following year. His first priority was reunite the fractured Chinese realm under a single imperial authority. The conquest of the southern Chen dynasty in 589 CE represented more than mere military victory. It symbolized the end of an era where Chinese civilization had developed along separate trajectories, creating distinct cultural identities in the north and south. The reunification brought together the martial traditions and administrative efficiency of the north, with the refined literary culture and economic prosperity of the south. This fusion would prove essential to the subsequent Tang dynasty's cosmopolitan character and cultural achievements. Perhaps no single achievement of the Sui dynasty had greater long-term impact than the construction of the Grand Canal system. Emperor Yang, who succeeded his father in 674 CE, launched this massive infrastructure project that would connect the Yellow River in the north with the Yangtze River system in the south. The canal stretched over 100 miles, making it one of the longest artificial waterways in human history. The construction required the labor of millions of workers, including peasants, soldiers, and prisoners. Contemporary accounts describe the enormous human cost, with hundreds of thousands dying during the construction process. However, the canal's completion revolutionized Chinese commerce and administration. For the first time in centuries, goods could flow efficiently between China's agricultural heartlands and its political centers. Rice from the fertile Yangtze River Valley could feed the armies and bureaucrats in the northern capitals. Silk, tea, and other luxury goods could reach markets across the empire. The canal also facilitated the movement of troops and officials, strengthening imperial control over distant provinces. This infrastructure investment would prove crucial to the Tang dynasty's ability to maintain unity across such a vast territory. The Grand Canal remained a vital transportation artery for over a millennium, demonstrating the far-sighted vision of Sui engineering. The Sui rulers understood that political unity required more than military conquest. They implemented comprehensive administrative reforms that would become the foundation for centuries of imperial governance. The equal field system redistributed land to peasant families, providing them with plots sufficient for subsistence while ensuring regular tax revenue for the state. This system addressed the chronic problem of land concentration among wealthy elites that had plagued previous dynasties. The Sui also refined the imperial examination system, expanding opportunities for talented individuals from modest backgrounds to enter government service based on merit rather than birth. This meritocratic approach would become a defining feature of Chinese imperial administration. Cultural integration proved equally important to long-term stability. The Sui court actively promoted Buddhism as a unifying force, sponsoring the construction of temples and monasteries throughout the empire. Buddhist philosophy, with its emphasis on universal compassion and the interconnectedness of all beings, provided an ideological framework that transcended regional and ethnic divisions. The dynasty also supported Confucian scholarship, commissioning new editions of classical texts and establishing schools to train future administrators. This synthesis of Buddhist spirituality and Confucian governance created a distinctive Chinese imperial ideology that would influence political thought for centuries. Emperor Yang's ambitions extended beyond China's traditional borders. His decision to launch massive military campaigns against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo would ultimately prove disastrous for the dynasty. Between 598 and 614 CE, the Sui launched 3 major expeditions against Korea, each involving hundreds of thousands of troops and enormous logistical challenges. The Korean campaigns revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the newly unified Chinese state. The Sui military demonstrated impressive organizational capabilities, mobilizing resources from across the empire and coordinating complex multi-front operations. However, the mountainous Korean terrain, fierce resistance from Goguryeo forces, and extended supply lines proved insurmountable obstacles. Each campaign ended in costly failure, draining the imperial treasury and exhausting the patience of the Chinese people. The failed Korean expeditions triggered widespread rebellions across the empire. Peasants, already burdened by heavy taxes and corvée labor for canal construction, rose up against imperial authority. Regional strongmen seized control of provinces, fragmenting the recently unified realm. Emperor Yang's assassination in 618 CE marked the end of the Sui dynasty and the beginning of another period of civil war. Despite its brief duration and dramatic collapse, the Sui dynasty's contributions to Chinese civilization were profound and lasting. The administrative systems, infrastructure projects, and cultural policies established during this period provided the foundation upon which the Tang dynasty would build its golden age. Li Yuan, who founded the Tang dynasty in 6018 CE, inherited not just the Sui's territorial boundaries but also its governmental institutions and cultural synthesis. The Tang rulers would refine and expand upon Sui innovations, creating one of history's most successful imperial systems. The Grand Canal continued to serve as the empire's commercial lifeline, while the examination system evolved into an even more sophisticated meritocracy. The Sui period demonstrates how historical transformation often occurs through the accumulation of institutional changes rather than dramatic political events. While the dynasty's military failures and political instability grab historical attention, its quiet administrative and cultural achievements shaped Chinese civilization for centuries to come. The Sui dynasty thus serves as a crucial bridge between the fragmented medieval period and the cosmopolitan Tang Golden Age, proving that even short-lived dynasties can have profound historical impact. The collapse of the Northern and Southern dynasties period left China fragmented and yearning for unity. From this chaos emerged Yang Jian, who would become Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty in 581 CE, carrying a clear vision to restore centralized imperial rule and reunite the Middle Kingdom once again. Drawing on the administrative strengths of the northern dynasties and the cultural richness of the southern kingdoms, Emperor Wen implemented sweeping political and administrative reforms that would fundamentally reshape Chinese governance for centuries to come. He standardized laws across the empire, re-established the imperial examination system that had fallen into disuse, and strengthened central authority by creating a unified bureaucratic structure. This model of governance, blending Confucian principles with practical administration, would later be refined and perfected by the Tang dynasty, becoming the foundation for imperial rule throughout Chinese history. One of the Sui dynasty's most ambitious and enduring legacies was the construction of the Grand Canal, a monumental engineering feat that stretched over 700 kilometers across the Chinese landscape. This vast waterway connected the Yellow River in the north with the Yangtze River in the south, creating an unprecedented transportation network that would serve China for over a millennium. More than just an engineering marvel, the Grand Canal served as a vital artery for trade, military movement, and economic integration between northern and southern China. The canal's completion facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures on a scale never before seen, setting the stage for the cosmopolitan nature that would define the Tang dynasty. Rice from the fertile Yangtze Valley could now feed the northern capitals, while northern manufactured goods flowed south in return. The Sui infrastructure projects extended far beyond the Grand Canal's impressive scope. Emperor Wen and his successor Emperor Yang undertook massive construction efforts, building roads, bridges, and fortifications across the empire that connected distant provinces and improved communication networks. These projects not only consolidated Sui power, but also improved trade and military logistics across vast distances, creating the infrastructure foundation that would prove crucial to the Tang dynasty's later expansion and cultural flourishing. The improved transportation networks allowed for rapid deployment of troops, efficient collection of taxes, and the spread of imperial edicts to the furthest corners of the realm. However, the Sui dynasty's ambitious projects came at a steep and ultimately unsustainable cost to the empire and its people. Heavy taxation, forced labor conscription, and mandatory service for grand construction efforts sparked widespread discontent among the populace who bore the burden of these massive undertakings. Emperor Yang's aggressive military campaigns, particularly his repeated and costly invasions of the Goguryeo kingdom in Korea, drained the empire's resources and further strained its stability. These military failures, combined with the enormous expense of maintaining the construction projects, created a perfect storm of economic hardship and social unrest. The empire's overextension led to numerous peasant uprisings and rebellions across the countryside, as common people could no longer bear the weight of imperial ambitions. Regional governors began to assert independence, and the centralized authority that Emperor Wen had worked so hard to establish began to crumble under the pressure of its own success. These factors ultimately culminated in the dynasty's collapse in 6018 CE after only 37 years of rule. Despite its brief reign, the Sui dynasty's impact on Chinese history cannot be overstated or underestimated. By reunifying China after centuries of division and implementing far-reaching administrative reforms, the Sui created a template for centralized imperial rule that subsequent dynasties would build upon and refine. The Grand Canal, in particular, would remain a critical piece of infrastructure for centuries, facilitating economic growth, cultural exchange, and political unity throughout Chinese history. The Sui period also witnessed significant developments in art, literature, and religion that would influence Chinese culture for generations. Buddhism, which had gained considerable popularity during the period of division, received imperial patronage under the Sui emperors, leading to the construction of numerous temples and the translation of sacred texts. This support for Buddhism, combined with the revival of Confucian values in governance, created a unique cultural landscape that blended foreign religious influences with traditional Chinese philosophical principles. The synthesis of these diverse cultural elements would later be expanded upon and perfected during the Tang dynasty, creating one of the most vibrant and cosmopolitan periods in Chinese history. As the Sui dynasty crumbled under the weight of its own ambitious projects, the stage was perfectly set for the rise of the Tang dynasty. The Tang would inherit a unified China with improved infrastructure, a centralized bureaucracy, and a rich cultural tapestry that blended elements from both north and south. But the true genius of the Tang lay in how they built upon these Sui foundations, learning from their predecessors' mistakes while capitalizing on their achievements. The Tang dynasty, founded in 6018 CE by Emperor Gaozu, would transform China into the most powerful and culturally influential empire of its time. Under Emperor Taizong's brilliant leadership, the Tang Empire expanded rapidly, pushing its borders from Korea in the east to Central Asia in the west, creating a vast cosmopolitan realm that welcomed traders, scholars, and artists from across the known world. The Tang capital of Chang'an grew into the world's largest and most international city, with over 1 million residents representing dozens of different cultures and nationalities. This golden age of Chinese civilization, built upon the solid foundations laid by the Sui dynasty, would be remembered as one of humanity's greatest cultural achievements. The Tang dynasty stands as one of China's most glorious periods, a time when the Middle Kingdom reached unprecedented heights of cultural achievement and international influence. Following the reunification accomplished by the Sui dynasty, the Tang rulers built upon these foundations to create an empire that would become the envy of the medieval world. Founded in 618 CE by Emperor Gaozu, the Tang dynasty would endure for nearly 3 centuries, establishing China as the dominant power in East Asia and creating a golden age of arts, literature, and technological innovation. The Tang capital of Chang'an, modern-day Sichuan, grew to become the largest city in the world during the 8th century, with a population exceeding 1 million inhabitants. This massive metropolis dwarfed contemporary European cities like Constantinople or Baghdad, showcasing the extraordinary prosperity and organizational capabilities of Tang civilization. Chang'an's wide grid-like streets were meticulously planned, creating an urban masterpiece that reflected the dynasty's emphasis on order and grandeur. These broad avenues were lined with bustling markets selling goods from across Asia and beyond, creating a commercial hub that rivaled any trading center in the ancient world. Merchants, scholars, and diplomats from as far away as Persia, Arabia, and even the Byzantine Empire walked these streets daily, creating an unprecedented melting pot of cultures and ideas. This remarkable cultural exchange was facilitated by the Silk Road, which reached its absolute zenith during the Tang era, connecting East and West in ways never before achieved. The vast network of trade routes not only brought exotic goods like spices, precious stones, and fine textiles to China, but also fostered the rapid spread of technologies, religions, and artistic styles across continents. Buddhism, which had been slowly gaining ground in China since the Han Dynasty, flourished magnificently during the Tang period, receiving imperial patronage and popular support. The construction of monumental cave temples, such as the spectacular Moga Caves near Dunhuang, showcased the remarkable integration of Buddhist iconography with traditional Chinese artistic traditions. These sacred sites, carved into cliffsides and decorated with thousands of painted murals, represent some of humanity's greatest artistic achievements and demonstrate the profound spiritual transformation occurring in Chinese society. The Tang Dynasty witnessed an extraordinary flowering of arts and literature that would influence Chinese culture for millennia to come. Poetry in particular reached new heights of sophistication and emotional expression, with the Tang period producing some of China's most celebrated literary figures. Li Bai and Du Fu, two of China's most revered poets, lived during this golden era, their works capturing both the grandeur and the human struggles of their time. Li Bai, known as the immortal poet, was famous for his romantic and often wine-inspired verses that celebrated nature, friendship, and the fleeting beauty of life. Du Fu, by contrast, became known as the poet sage for his deeply moving social commentary and his ability to capture the suffering of ordinary people during times of war and hardship. Their works, along with those of countless other Tang poets, continued to be studied, memorized, and admired throughout Chinese history, forming the foundation of classical Chinese literature. The visual arts also thrived during this period, with remarkable innovations in painting, sculpture, and ceramics that pushed artistic boundaries in unprecedented ways. The famous Tang tree, color-glazed pottery, with its vibrant hues of green, amber, and cream, and its fluid, naturalistic forms, exemplifies the artistic achievements of this remarkable period. These ceramic masterpieces, often depicting horses, camels, and court figures, were not merely decorative objects, but sophisticated works of art that captured the dynamic spirit of Tang society. Tang painters developed new techniques in landscape painting and figure drawing, creating works that combined technical mastery with profound aesthetic sensibility. The period also saw the flourishing of sculpture, with Buddhist statuary reaching new levels of grace and spiritual expression, while secular art celebrated the cosmopolitan nature of Tang society. However, the Tang's golden age was not destined to last forever, and internal contradictions within the empire eventually led to devastating conflict. In 755 CE, the An Lushan rebellion erupted like a thunderbolt, plunging the empire into nearly a decade of catastrophic civil war that would forever change the dynasty's trajectory. General An Lushan, a trusted military commander of mixed Sogdian and Turkic ancestry, had gained the confidence of Emperor Xuanzong and held significant power in the northeastern frontier regions. His rebellion exposed the fundamental vulnerabilities of the empire's vast territorial holdings and the dangers of allowing military commanders too much autonomy. The conflict was particularly devastating because An Lushan controlled some of the empire's most prosperous and strategically important regions, including the approaches to the capital. Although the rebellion was eventually suppressed through enormous effort and sacrifice, it marked an irreversible turning point in Tang history, fundamentally altering the balance of power within the empire. The central government's authority was permanently weakened, and the empire never fully recovered its former glory, prestige, or territorial control. The rebellion's aftermath saw the rise of powerful regional military governors who operated with increasing independence from central authority. Despite this monumental setback, the Tang dynasty managed to continue for another century and a half, experiencing periods of recovery and renewed cultural vitality that demonstrated the resilience of Chinese civilization. The reign of Emperor Xuanzong, which preceded the An Lushan rebellion, is particularly remembered as the absolute high point of Tang civilization, a time when arts, literature, and courtly refinement reached their zenith. Under his rule, the imperial court became an unparalleled center of learning and cultural achievement, attracting the greatest minds and artists from across the known world. The Tang dynasty's influence extended far beyond China's borders, establishing cultural and political models that would be adopted by neighboring states for centuries to come. Japan and Korea, in particular, looked to Tang China as the pinnacle of civilization, sending regular diplomatic missions and students to study Chinese institutions, philosophy, and culture. The Japanese even established a formal system of envoys known as kintoshi, who made dangerous sea voyages to study Tang institutions and bring back Chinese knowledge to Japan. This cultural exchange led to profound Chinese influence on Japanese art, literature, architecture, and governance systems, effects that can still be observed in modern Japanese culture. As the Tang dynasty's power gradually faded, China entered a period of political fragmentation that would severely test the resilience and adaptability of Chinese civilization. The 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms era, lasting from 907 to 960 CE, saw the once mighty empire splinter into a complex patchwork of competing states, each claiming legitimacy and struggling for survival. In the north, 5 short-lived dynasties rose and fell in rapid succession, each desperately struggling to maintain control over the fractious and war-torn region. Meanwhile, the south was divided among 10 independent kingdoms, each carving out its own sphere of influence and developing distinct regional characteristics and cultures. The northern region, once the heartland of Chinese imperial power, became a perpetual battleground for ambitious warlords and military strongmen. The later Liang, later Tang, later Jin, later Han, and later Zhou dynasties all claimed the sacred mandate of heaven, but none could secure lasting legitimacy or establish stable governance. Military coups and shifting alliances became the norm during this chaotic period, with power often changing hands through violence rather than peaceful succession or hereditary transfer. This persistent instability was fueled by the growing influence of military governors, or judushi, who had gained significant autonomy during the late Tang period and now acted as de facto warlords. In stark contrast, the southern kingdoms enjoyed relative stability and prosperity, with cities like Yangzhou and Hangzhou flourishing as vibrant centers of commerce and cultural achievement. These southern states benefited enormously from the region's fertile agricultural lands and extensive waterway systems, which provided both food security and transportation networks for trade. Despite the political chaos and fragmentation, this period witnessed remarkable cultural and technological developments that would prove crucial for China's future reunification and advancement. The Song dynasty's rise in 960 CE marked far more than just another political transition in Chinese history. It represented the beginning of what historians now recognize as one of the most transformative periods in human civilization, a time when China would lead the world in technological innovation, economic sophistication, and cultural achievement. Emperor Taizu's establishment of the Song dynasty came at a crucial moment when China desperately needed stability after decades of fragmentation. Yet what made the Song truly revolutionary was not their military conquest, but their radical reimagining of how a society should be organized and governed. The decision to elevate scholarly achievement over military prowess would prove to be one of the most consequential choices in Chinese history. The transformation of Chinese governance during the Song period represented a fundamental shift in the nature of power and authority. Unlike previous dynasties that relied heavily on hereditary aristocracy or military strongmen, the Song created a system where intellectual merit became the primary pathway to political influence. The civil service examination system, which had existed in earlier forms, was expanded and refined to an unprecedented degree of sophistication. These examinations tested candidates on classical Confucian texts, poetry, essay writing, and practical governance issues, creating a standardized measure of scholarly achievement that transcended social class boundaries. Young men from across the empire would spend years preparing for these grueling tests, often studying for decades to master the vast corpus of required knowledge. The examinations themselves were conducted with extraordinary care to ensure fairness, with candidates identified only by numbers rather than names, and their papers copied by clerks to prevent recognition of handwriting. This meritocratic system produced a class of highly educated bureaucrats who brought unprecedented expertise to government administration. These scholar officials didn't simply implement imperial decrees, they actively participated in policy formation, bringing their deep knowledge of history, philosophy, and practical governance to bear on contemporary challenges. The result was a government that was remarkably responsive to changing circumstances and capable of implementing complex, long-term strategies. The emphasis on education extended far beyond government service, permeating all levels of society and creating a culture that valued learning and intellectual achievement above material wealth or military prowess. The Song period witnessed an explosion of technological innovation that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of human civilization. The invention of movable type printing by Bai Sheng around 1040 CE represented a quantum leap in humanity's ability to preserve and disseminate knowledge. While earlier printing methods using wooden blocks had existed, movable type allowed for much more efficient and flexible book production, making written materials accessible to a broader segment of society than ever before. This printing revolution coincided with the development of paper money, another Song innovation that would transform global commerce. The concept of using paper certificates to represent monetary value rather than relying solely on precious metals was revolutionary, allowing for more efficient trade and the development of sophisticated banking systems. Song merchants could now conduct business across vast distances without the burden of transporting heavy coins, facilitating trade networks that stretched from Southeast Asia to the Middle East. The economic implications of these innovations were staggering, as China experienced unprecedented commercial growth and urbanization. Cities like Kaifeng, the Song capital, became bustling metropolises with populations exceeding 1 million inhabitants, featuring sophisticated infrastructure including paved streets, public sanitation systems, and organized fire departments. The maritime Silk Road flourished during this era, with Chinese ships equipped with advanced navigation tools, including the magnetic compass, another Song innovation that would eventually revolutionize global exploration. Chinese merchants established trading posts throughout Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, while foreign traders flocked to Chinese ports, creating a truly international commercial network. The Song period's cultural achievements were as remarkable as its technological and economic innovations. Neo-Confucianism, the philosophical synthesis that emerged during this time, represented a sophisticated attempt to reconcile traditional Confucian ethics with Buddhist metaphysics and Taoist naturalism. Scholars like Zhu Xi developed comprehensive philosophical systems that addressed fundamental questions about human nature, the cosmos, and the proper organization of society. This intellectual movement wasn't merely academic, it profoundly influenced education, governance, and social relationships throughout Chinese society and beyond. The arts flourished during the Song period, with painters developing new techniques for landscape painting that captured the essence of natural beauty with unprecedented subtlety and depth. Song ceramics reached new heights of technical and artistic achievement, producing porcelain so fine and beautiful that it became prized throughout the known world. Poetry and literature continued to evolve, with songwriters exploring new themes and developing innovative literary forms that would influence Chinese culture for centuries to come. The period also saw significant advances in historical scholarship, with historians like Sima Guang compiling comprehensive records that provided detailed accounts of Chinese history and governance. Despite facing constant military pressure from northern neighbors including the Liao, Jin, and western Shishou dynasties, the Song managed to maintain their cultural and economic achievements through sophisticated diplomacy and strategic tribute payments. This approach, while sometimes criticized as weakness, actually demonstrated the Song's understanding that cultural and economic power could be more enduring than military conquest. The Song Renaissance established patterns of innovation, governance, and cultural development that would influence not only China but the entire world for centuries to come. In the early 13th century, as the Song dynasty reached new heights of cultural and technological achievement, a storm was brewing on the northern steppes that would forever change the course of Chinese history. The Mongols, a confederation of nomadic tribes united under the brilliant military leadership of Genghis Khan, began their systematic conquest of the known world. What started as raids and skirmishes evolved into one of history's most successful military campaigns, ultimately creating the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. When Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, established the Yuan dynasty in 1271 CE, it marked the first time in Chinese history that the entire Middle Kingdom fell under foreign rule. This seismic shift represented more than just a change in dynasty. It was a fundamental transformation of Chinese civilization itself. Kublai Khan, recognizing the vast complexity and sophistication of Chinese society, made the strategic decision to move his capital to Dadu, present-day Beijing. This choice symbolized the Mongol commitment to ruling China not as mere conquerors, but as legitimate inheritors of the mandate of heaven. The Yuan dynasty created a unique fusion of Mongol and Chinese traditions that would reshape everything from government administration to art, cuisine, and daily life. Under Mongol rule, China became integrated into the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace that facilitated unprecedented trade and cultural exchange across Eurasia. The famous Silk Road, which had connected East and West for centuries, now flourished under unified Mongol protection, creating opportunities for merchants, diplomats, and travelers that had never existed before. It was during this remarkable era that Marco Polo, the young Venetian merchant, embarked on his legendary journey to China. His detailed accounts of the wealth, sophistication, and grandeur of Kublai Khan's court captivated European imaginations and fundamentally altered Western perceptions of the East. While historians continue to debate the accuracy of some of Polo's more fantastical claims, his writings undoubtedly played a crucial role in inspiring European interest in Asian trade and exploration. Polo's descriptions of paper money, coal burning, and advanced printing techniques introduced Europeans to innovations that were centuries ahead of their own technology. The Yuan period witnessed remarkable achievements across multiple fields of human endeavor. Chinese astronomy flourished under Mongol patronage, with new observatories constructed and star charts created with unprecedented accuracy. The production of blue and white porcelain reached new artistic heights, creating treasured objects that became prized possessions across Asia and eventually throughout Europe. In the realm of performing arts, the Zaju form of musical drama emerged, brilliantly blending elements of Central Asian and traditional Chinese performance traditions. However, the Yuan dynasty was not without significant challenges and contradictions. The Mongols instituted a rigid four-tier social hierarchy that placed Mongols at the top, followed by other Central Asian peoples, then Northern Chinese, and finally Southern Chinese at the bottom. This discriminatory system, while initially effective in maintaining Mongol control, gradually sowed deep seeds of resentment among the Han Chinese majority. The Mongol emphasis on international trade and the massive influx of foreign silver led to dramatic economic changes throughout Chinese society. Paper currency became widely adopted, and the economy became increasingly monetized, bringing prosperity to merchants and urban dwellers while creating new forms of financial instability. As the 14th century progressed, the Yuan dynasty faced mounting challenges that would ultimately prove insurmountable. Natural disasters struck with alarming frequency, including devastating floods and plague outbreaks that decimated the population. The Yellow River changed course dramatically in 1344, causing widespread devastation across northern China and displacing millions of people. These calamities, combined with heavy taxation and growing resentment toward foreign rule, fueled widespread popular discontent. The Red Turban Rebellion, which erupted in the 1350s, marked the beginning of the end for Mongol rule in China. Led by Zhu Wanzhang, a peasant of humble origins who possessed extraordinary military and political talents, the rebellion successfully tapped into deep-seated anti-Mongol sentiment throughout the country. By 1368, the rebel forces had captured the Yuan capital, and the last Yuan emperor fled northward, bringing an end to nearly a century of Mongol dominance. The fall of the Yuan dynasty marked a pivotal moment in Chinese history, but the true transformation was yet to come. In 1368, Zhu Wanzhang ascended to the imperial throne as the Hongwu emperor, founding the Ming dynasty and ushering in a new golden age of Han Chinese culture. This event signaled far more than just another dynastic change. It heralded a comprehensive renaissance of Chinese civilization and a determined reassertion of traditional Confucian values. The early Ming years were characterized by sweeping efforts to centralize imperial power and restore authentically Chinese institutions after decades of foreign rule. Emperor Hongwu implemented comprehensive reforms, abolishing Mongol-style government structures and reviving the civil service examination system based on Confucian principles. This restoration not only strengthened imperial control, but also reaffirmed the fundamental Chinese belief in meritocratic governance and scholarly achievement. The Ming Dynasty would go on to become one of China's most celebrated periods, marked by architectural marvels like the Forbidden City, maritime expeditions that reached Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, and cultural achievements that continue to define Chinese civilization today. The Ming Dynasty emerged from the ashes of Mongol rule in 1368, marking one of the most remarkable reversals of fortune in Chinese history. After decades of rebellion against the Yuan dynasty, a peasant-born leader named Zhu Yuanzhang successfully unified China under native rule once again. Taking the imperial name Hongwu, he established the Ming Dynasty with its capital at Nanjing, beginning what would become a 276-year reign that fundamentally reshaped Chinese civilization. The early Ming period represented more than just a change of dynasty. It marked a conscious effort to restore authentic Chinese culture and governance after nearly a century of foreign rule. Emperor Hongwu implemented sweeping reforms that eliminated many Mongol influences while reviving traditional Chinese institutions and practices. The civil service examination system was restored and expanded, ensuring that government positions were filled based on merit rather than birth or connections. This reaffirmation of meritocratic principles became a cornerstone of Ming governance and helped create one of the most efficient administrative systems in Chinese history. Under Ming rule, China experienced an unprecedented period of economic prosperity and cultural flourishing that touched every aspect of society. The population grew rapidly from approximately 65 million to over 100 million people during the first century of Ming rule, reflecting improved agricultural techniques and political stability. Agriculture expanded dramatically as new crops from the Americas, including corn, sweet potatoes, and peanuts, were introduced and cultivated across the empire. These new food sources not only increased agricultural productivity, but also allowed farming to expand into previously unsuitable lands. Trade flourished both domestically and internationally, with Chinese merchants establishing extensive networks that stretched from Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean. Cities like Nanjing and Beijing transformed into bustling centers of commerce and culture, attracting merchants, scholars, and artisans from across the empire and beyond. The urban centers became showcases of Chinese craftsmanship, with workshops producing exquisite porcelain, silk, lacquerware, and other luxury goods that were prized throughout Asia and beyond. One of the most remarkable aspects of the early Ming Dynasty was its ambitious naval expeditions led by the legendary Admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He commanded 7 massive voyages that demonstrated China's technological prowess and maritime capabilities to the world. These expeditions involved fleets of hundreds of ships, including massive treasure ships that dwarfed European vessels of the time, carrying tens of thousands of sailors, soldiers, merchants, and diplomats. The voyages reached as far as East Africa, establishing diplomatic relations with dozens of kingdoms and expanding China's trade networks across the Indian Ocean. These expeditions showcased Chinese innovations in navigation, shipbuilding, and maritime technology while spreading Chinese influence and prestige throughout the known world. The Ming Dynasty is perhaps best remembered for its grand construction projects that continue to define China's architectural heritage today. Emperor Yongle, who ruled from 1402 to 1424, made the momentous decision to move the capital from Nanjing to Beijing, initiating one of the largest construction projects in human history. The creation of the Forbidden City transformed Beijing into a magnificent imperial capital worthy of the world's largest empire. This vast complex of palaces, courtyards, and ceremonial buildings became not only the seat of imperial power, but also a symbol of China's architectural and artistic achievements. The Forbidden City's construction required over 1 million workers and incorporated the finest materials from across the empire, including precious woods from the south and marble from nearby quarries. The Ming also undertook extensive renovations and expansions of the Great Wall, creating much of the structure that visitors see today. Unlike earlier versions built by previous dynasties, the Ming Great Wall was constructed with brick and stone, making it far more durable and imposing than its predecessors. This massive undertaking involved hundreds of thousands of workers and represented one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. Beyond these monumental projects, the Ming period saw remarkable achievements in literature, art, and scholarship. The period produced classic novels like Journey to the West and water margin, that remain beloved parts of Chinese culture today. Ming artisans perfected techniques in porcelain production, creating pieces of such beauty and quality that they were treasured by collectors worldwide. Despite its early successes and cultural achievements, the Ming dynasty faced mounting challenges as the centuries progressed. Natural disasters, including devastating droughts and floods, led to widespread crop failures and famine in many regions of the empire. The dynasty's reliance on silver as currency created economic vulnerabilities, particularly when silver imports from the Americas began to decline in the late 16th century. This currency shortage caused deflation and economic disruption that affected trade and government revenues across the empire. Corruption within the imperial court and bureaucracy grew increasingly problematic, weakening the government's effectiveness and eroding public trust in imperial institutions. Powerful eunuch factions gained influence at court, often pursuing personal interests rather than the welfare of the empire. By the 16th century, the Ming faced escalating external threats that strained the dynasty's military capabilities. Japanese pirates, known as woko, launched devastating raids along China's extensive coastline, disrupting trade and terrorizing coastal communities. To the north, the Manchu people were consolidating power and beginning to challenge Ming authority along the northeastern frontier. The dynasty's military, once formidable and technologically advanced, struggled to effectively repel these multiple threats while maintaining internal security. Internal rebellions, fueled by economic hardship and dissatisfaction with imperial rule, further destabilized the empire and diverted resources from external defense. The final blow came in the early 17th century when a combination of catastrophic factors overwhelmed the Ming government's ability to respond effectively. Climate change led to severe crop failures and famine, while widespread rebellions erupted across the empire as desperate populations sought relief from their suffering. Manchu invasions from the northeast intensified, taking advantage of Ming military weakness and internal chaos. In 1644, rebel forces led by Li Ziqing captured Beijing, and the last Ming emperor, Chongzhen, took his own life rather than face capture. This dramatic end brought to a close 276 years of Ming rule and opened the door for the Manchu conquest that would establish China's final imperial dynasty. The Ming dynasty's legacy extends far beyond its political achievements to encompass lasting contributions to Chinese culture, architecture, and governance that continue to influence China today. The Qing dynasty, China's final imperial dynasty, began as foreign conquerors but evolved into devoted guardians of Chinese civilization itself. When the Manchus established their rule in 1644, they faced the monumental challenge of governing the world's most populous empire while maintaining their distinct cultural identity. The early Qing emperors, particularly Kangxi, Yongjing, and Qianlong, demonstrated remarkable administrative skill in managing this vast and diverse realm. Under their rule, China's infrastructure flourished as never before, with river systems and the Grand Canal receiving careful maintenance that supported both domestic trade and efficient food distribution throughout the empire. This extensive network of waterways served as the economic arteries of the nation, facilitating growth in both bustling urban centers and remote rural communities, ultimately contributing to the dynasty's impressive longevity. Despite their non-Han origins, the Qing emperors made a deliberate choice to embrace and actively promote traditional Chinese culture, understanding that legitimacy came through cultural continuity rather than military force alone. The imperial court remained a vibrant center of time, honored rituals, scholarly pursuits, and Confucian governance, with the emperor himself serving as the symbolic bridge between heaven and earth in accordance with ancient Chinese cosmology. A sophisticated and complex bureaucracy managed what was arguably the world's most populous and ethnically diverse empire, carefully balancing the competing needs and interests of various ethnic groups across far-flung regions. This administrative system, refined over centuries of imperial rule, represented one of humanity's most impressive achievements in governance and social organization. However, the Qing era also witnessed the gradual increase of foreign influence in trade, which inevitably led to mounting tensions with emerging Western powers who sought to penetrate China's traditionally closed markets. These escalating conflicts reached their climax in devastating events like the Opium Wars, fought from 1839 to 1842 and again from 1856 to 1860. which exposed China's military weaknesses and forced the imposition of humiliating unequal treaties. These treaties systematically eroded Chinese sovereignty and marked the beginning of what Chinese historians would later call the Century of Humiliation. The dynasty's ultimate ability to adapt to these unprecedented challenges from the modern world would determine not only its own fate, but the future direction of Chinese civilization. As the Qing expanded their territorial control far beyond traditional Chinese borders, they unknowingly set in motion unforeseen consequences that would eventually contribute to the dynasty's dramatic downfall. The sheer vastness of their empire, while serving as a source of immense pride and abundant natural resources, also stretched the government's administrative capacity and ability to govern effectively across such enormous distances. Maintaining meaningful control over such diverse populations and far-flung regions became increasingly difficult and expensive as the centuries progressed and new challenges emerged from both internal and external sources. The remarkable cultural synthesis that emerged under Qing rule produced profound and lasting effects on Chinese society that continue to influence modern China today. Manchu customs, traditions, and perspectives became intricately interwoven with Han Chinese culture, creating a rich and complex tapestry of shared identity that transcended ethnic boundaries. This blending of distinct cultures extended deeply into art, literature, and philosophy, producing innovative new forms of expression that reflected the sophisticated and multifaceted identity of the Qing state. By 1683, when the Qing had successfully consolidated their power over China proper, few contemporary observers could have predicted that this empire would eventually double in size through ambitious military campaigns. The subsequent conquests in Central Asia and Tibet dramatically expanded China's sphere of influence, but simultaneously brought entirely new categories of challenges and responsibilities. The Qing now faced the daunting task of defending extremely long and exposed borders against potential invasions while managing complex diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers like the expanding Russian Empire. The fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 marked the definitive end of an imperial era that had lasted for over 2 millennia, fundamentally transforming the nature of Chinese political and social organization. For more than 2,000 years, emperors had ruled China with divine mandate, each dynasty rising and falling in cyclical patterns that seemed as eternal and unchanging as the Middle Kingdom itself. But as the 20th century dawned with its revolutionary technologies and ideologies, this ancient system finally crumbled under the combined weight of internal strife, relentless foreign pressures, and growing popular demands for modernization and democratic reform. The seeds of this revolutionary transformation had been planted decades earlier, carefully nurtured by years of national humiliation at the hands of foreign powers and the Qing government's repeated inability to effectively modernize China's military, economy, and political institutions. As the new century began with hope and uncertainty, these long, dormant seeds suddenly sprouted into a full-blown revolutionary movement that would reshape the entire fabric of Chinese society. At the forefront of this historic transformation stood Sun Yat-sen and his Tongmenghui organization, which passionately advocated for establishing a republican government based on his famous 3 principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood. The dramatic spark that ignited this revolutionary powder keg came on October 10, 1911, with the Wuqing Uprising, an event that would forever change the course of Chinese history. What began as a seemingly localized revolt quickly spread like wildfire across the vast Chinese landscape, as province after province boldly declared independence from centuries of Qing rule. The dynasty that had once seemed invincible and eternal now found itself teetering precariously on the brink of complete collapse, unable to contain the revolutionary fervor sweeping the nation. The dream of a modern democratic China seemed within reach after the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912, but the next chapter in China's story would unfold in ways few could have predicted. As the last emperor abdicated his throne, a power vacuum emerged that would plunge the nation into a period of chaos and fragmentation known as the Warlord Era. The death of Yuan Shikai in 1916 marked the true beginning of this tumultuous time. Yuan, a powerful military leader who had briefly and disastrously declared himself emperor, left behind a fractured political landscape that would define Chinese politics for the next decade. Without a strong central authority to maintain order and unity, regional military commanders known as warlords seized control of different parts of the vast country. These warlords, often former officers of the Qing military or ambitious local strongmen, commanded their own private armies and ruled their territories like personal kingdoms. The map of China during this period resembled a constantly shifting patchwork of competing domains. Major factions like the Anhui, Jili, and Fengshan cliques vied for dominance, forming temporary alliances one day only to betray each other when it suited their interests the next. Strategic cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou became centers of power, changing hands frequently as warlords fought bitter campaigns for control. The common people bore the heaviest burden of this chronic instability, suffering under crushing taxation, forced conscription of their sons, and the constant threat of violence from competing armies. Villages were routinely pillaged by passing troops, and farmers found themselves caught between rival forces demanding tribute and supplies. Yet amidst this apparent chaos and breakdown of traditional order, new ideas and movements were taking root that would fundamentally reshape Chinese society. The May 4th movement of 1919 sparked a surge in Chinese nationalism and an urgent desire for comprehensive modernization. This pivotal moment began as student protests against the Treaty of Versailles, which had transferred German concessions in Shandong province to Japan rather than returning them to China. The movement quickly evolved into something far more profound than a simple diplomatic protest. Intellectuals and students, inspired by Western concepts of democracy, science, and individual rights, began to challenge the traditional Confucian values that had dominated Chinese culture for millennia. They called for a new culture that could strengthen China and help it stand up to foreign imperialism and internal weakness. This period witnessed the birth of modern Chinese literature, with pioneering writers like Lu Xun experimenting with vernacular language to reach a wider audience beyond the educated elite. The movement promoted the use of colloquial Chinese in literature and education, breaking down barriers between the scholarly class and ordinary citizens. Universities became hotbeds of political activism and intellectual ferment, as young Chinese grappled with fundamental questions about their nation's identity and future direction. The political landscape was also undergoing dramatic evolution during these turbulent years. Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang or KMT party, founded on the principles of nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, sought to reunify the country under a republican government. Sun, often called the father of modern China, had spent years in exile developing his revolutionary ideology and building international support for Chinese republicanism. Meanwhile, a group of young radicals, deeply influenced by the recent Russian Revolution and Marxist ideology, founded the Chinese Communist Party or CCP in Shanghai in 1921. These 12 founding members, including future leader Mao Zedong, represented a new generation of Chinese revolutionaries who believed that only radical social transformation could save their country. These two parties, initially unlikely allies united by their opposition to warlordism and foreign imperialism, would go on to shape China's future in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The cooperation between the KMT and CCP, known as the First United Front, was facilitated by Soviet advisors who saw an opportunity to spread communist influence in Asia. Economic conditions during the warlord era varied dramatically across different regions of the fragmented nation. Some areas, particularly coastal cities with international connections, experienced remarkable industrial growth and modernization despite the political chaos. Shanghai, in particular, became a thriving cosmopolitan metropolis, its bustling port connecting China to the global economy and serving as a window to Western culture and technology. The city's foreign concessions provided relative stability and attracted Chinese entrepreneurs, intellectuals, and refugees from war-torn regions. However, much of the country, especially the vast rural interior where most Chinese lived, suffered from grinding poverty, rampant banditry, and ruthless exploitation under arbitrary warlord rule. The lack of a unified national economy hindered overall development and exacerbated existing inequalities between rich and poor, urban and rural, coastal and inland regions. Warlords imposed their own currencies, tariffs, and regulations, creating a patchwork of economic systems that stifled trade and investment. Despite the apparent political fragmentation and economic disruption, This period paradoxically strengthened China's emerging national identity. The shared experience of hardship, humiliation, and the burning desire for a strong, unified nation brought people together in ways that transcended traditional regional and cultural differences. The May 4th movement, in particular, played a crucial role in fostering a modern sense of Chinese nationalism that would endure long after the warlord era had ended. This new nationalism was different from traditional Chinese identity, incorporating Western concepts of popular sovereignty and national self-determination while maintaining distinctly Chinese characteristics. The turning point came with the Northern Expedition of 1926 to 1928, led by Chiang Kai-shek, the military commander of the Kuomintang. Chiang's National Revolutionary Army set out to defeat the warlords, once and for all, and reunify the country under Republican rule. With crucial support from Soviet advisors and the cooperation of the Chinese Communist Party, Chiang's forces gradually pushed northward, defeating warlord armies and capturing key cities. This campaign would mark the end of the warlord era and set the stage for the next dramatic chapter in China's tumultuous journey toward modernity. The Second Sino-Japanese War erupted with devastating force in 1937, transforming China's internal political struggle into a desperate fight for national survival. The Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing on July 7th sparked what would become a full-scale Japanese invasion, thrusting China headlong into World War II and forever altering the trajectory of its modern development. This external threat forced bitter rivals, the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party, into an uneasy alliance known as the Second United Front. But this cooperation came at tremendous cost, as both parties would discover that fighting for China's future meant first ensuring China had a future at all. As Japanese forces advanced with ruthless efficiency, major Chinese cities fell like dominoes in a carefully orchestrated campaign of conquest. Beijing, the ancient capital, surrendered without significant resistance in July 1937, followed by the fall of Shanghai after months of brutal urban warfare that showcased both Chinese determination and Japanese military superiority. The capture of Nanjing in December 1937 marked one of the darkest chapters in modern Chinese history. What followed became known as the Nanjing Massacre, a 6-week period of systematic brutality that saw Japanese forces murder hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. The atrocities committed during this period galvanized Chinese resistance and demonstrated the existential nature of the threat facing the nation. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government was forced to abandon the capital and retreat westward, eventually establishing a wartime capital in the mountainous city of Chongqing. This strategic withdrawal, while preserving the government's ability to continue the fight, also highlighted the desperate circumstances facing the Chinese Republic. The Japanese occupation of China's most prosperous and industrialized regions meant that the nationalists lost access to their primary sources of revenue and modern military equipment. Meanwhile, the communist forces, already experienced in guerrilla warfare from their years of fighting the nationalists, adapted more quickly to the new reality of occupation and resistance. Operating from their base areas in northern China, particularly in Shaanxi province, the communists began to expand their influence through a combination of military action and political organization. The Second United Front between the Kuomintang and Communist Party represented a marriage of convenience rather than genuine reconciliation. Both parties maintained their separate armies, territories, and political objectives while nominally cooperating against the Japanese invaders. This arrangement created a complex three-way struggle that would define Chinese politics for the next 8 years. Chiang Kai-shek's strategy focused on preserving his regular armies for what he saw as the inevitable post-war confrontation with the communists. The nationalist leader believed that China's Western allies, particularly the United States, would ultimately defeat Japan, allowing him to emerge from the war with his forces intact and ready to complete the unification of China under nationalist rule. This approach led to criticism that Chiang was more concerned with fighting communists than Japanese, though the nationalist forces did engage in significant battles throughout the war. The communist strategy, developed primarily under Mao Zedong's leadership, emphasized expanding their base areas behind Japanese lines and building support among the rural population. Rather than engaging in large-scale conventional battles, Communist forces focused on guerrilla warfare, political mobilization, and land reform programs that won them considerable support among China's peasant majority. This approach proved remarkably effective as communist-controlled areas expanded from small pockets in 1937 to vast regions encompassing millions of people by 1945. The communists' emphasis on political work and their willingness to implement radical social reforms in their base areas created a foundation of popular support that would prove crucial in the post-war period. Their military forces, initially much smaller and less well-equipped than the nationalists, grew dramatically through recruitment and captured Japanese weapons. The 8 years of Japanese occupation fundamentally transformed Chinese society in ways that would have lasting implications for the country's future development. The war displaced millions of people, destroyed much of China's modern industrial infrastructure, and created new patterns of political loyalty and social organization. In the areas under Japanese control, puppet governments attempted to maintain order while extracting resources for the Japanese war effort. These collaborationist regimes, including the Wang Jingwei government in Nanjing, faced constant resistance from both communist and nationalist guerrilla forces. The harsh realities of occupation, including forced labor, resource extraction, and brutal repression of resistance activities, turned much of the Chinese population against not only the Japanese, but also those Chinese who collaborated with them. In the communist base areas, radical social experiments transformed traditional rural society through land redistribution, literacy campaigns, and new forms of political organization. Women's rights were expanded, traditional hierarchies were challenged, and new institutions of local governance were established that gave ordinary peasants unprecedented political participation. These changes created a model of revolutionary transformation that the communists would later apply to all of China after their victory in the Civil War. The nationalist-controlled areas, centered around the wartime capital of Chongqing, faced different but equally severe challenges. Hyperinflation, corruption, and the strain of maintaining large armies, while cut off from China's most productive regions, created growing dissatisfaction with nationalist rule among intellectuals, businessmen, and ordinary citizens. By 1945, when Japan finally surrendered, China emerged from the war as a recognized great power and founding member of the United Nations. But the country remained deeply divided and exhausted. The stage was now set for the final confrontation between the nationalists and communists, a struggle that would determine whether China's future lay with Chiang Kai-shek's vision of a modern republic or Mao Zedong's revolutionary communist state. The year 1945 marked not an end but a beginning for China's tormented journey toward unity. As the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally brought Japan to its knees, China stood victorious yet utterly broken. The 8-year war of resistance had claimed over 20 million Chinese lives and left the nation's infrastructure in ruins. But even as the Japanese surrendered, another storm was brewing on the horizon. The fragile wartime alliance between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government and Mao Zedong's communist forces began to crumble almost immediately after Japan's defeat. Both sides had used the war years to strengthen their positions, and now they faced each other across a divided China with irreconcilable visions for the nation's future. The nationalists, officially known as the Kuomintang or KMT, appeared to hold all the advantages as the Civil War resumed in earnest in 1946. They controlled China's major cities, including the capital Nanjing, and commanded superior numbers with over 3 million troops compared to the communists' 1 million. More importantly, they enjoyed substantial backing from the United States, which provided military equipment, financial aid, and strategic advisors. American support seemed to guarantee nationalist victory, as the United States viewed Chiang Kai-shek as China's legitimate leader and a crucial ally in the emerging Cold War against Soviet communism. However, beneath this apparent strength lay fatal weaknesses that would ultimately doom the nationalist cause. Corruption had become endemic within KMT ranks, with officials more interested in personal enrichment than effective governance. Military commanders often hoarded supplies and equipment rather than using them strategically, while soldiers frequently went unpaid and unfed. The nationalist government's heavy-handed policies in the cities and their failure to address rural poverty had alienated much of the population they claimed to represent. In stark contrast, The Chinese Communist Party had spent the war years building something far more valuable than military hardware: genuine popular support. Mao Zedong's forces had established base areas throughout rural China, implementing land reforms that redistributed property from wealthy landlords to poor peasants. This revolutionary approach won the hearts and minds of China's vast rural population, who comprised over 80% of the nation. The communist military arm, known as the People's Liberation Army or PLA, had mastered the art of guerrilla warfare during their resistance against Japan. They understood how to live off the land, move quickly through familiar territory, and strike at enemy weak points before melting back into the countryside. More crucially, they enjoyed the active support of local populations who provided intelligence, supplies, and recruits. The PLA's soldiers were motivated by ideological conviction and the promise of a better future, fighting with a dedication that contrasted sharply with the demoralized nationalist troops. Communist commanders like Lin Biao Chenyi and Liu Bocheng had proven themselves brilliant tacticians during the anti-Japanese War, and they now turned these skills against their former allies. The early phases of the renewed civil war seemed to confirm nationalist advantages. KMT forces initially captured several communist strongholds and pushed the PLA back from key strategic positions. American military advisors confidently predicted that Chiang Kai-shek would achieve victory within months. However, the communists' apparent retreats were actually strategic withdrawals designed to draw nationalist forces into unfavorable positions. As KMT armies advanced deeper into communist-controlled territory, they found themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable to counterattack. The turning point came in 1947 with a series of communist offensives that demonstrated their growing strength and tactical superiority. The Battle of Yichuan in Henan Province saw PLA forces annihilate an entire nationalist division, capturing vast quantities of American-supplied equipment. Even more significant was the psychological impact of these victories, which began to convince many Chinese that the communists represented the wave of the future. The decisive campaigns of 1948 and 1949 would later be remembered as among the largest military operations in human history. The Liaoshen campaign in Manchuria saw Lin Biao's forces systematically destroy nationalist armies totaling over 400,000 men. The Weihai campaign in central China involved over 1 million troops on both sides and resulted in another catastrophic defeat for the KMT. Finally, the Pingjin campaign captured Beijing and Tianjin, opening the path to complete communist victory. These massive battles demonstrated that the PLA had evolved from a guerrilla force into a modern army capable of conventional warfare on an unprecedented scale. More importantly, they revealed the complete collapse of nationalist morale and fighting capacity. Entire KMT divisions surrendered without firing a shot, while others simply melted away as soldiers deserted en masse. The final act came with stunning speed. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Beijing and proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. His words echoed across Tiananmen Square and around the world. The Chinese people have stood up. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of his government fled to Taiwan, taking with them China's gold reserves and claiming to represent the legitimate government of all China. The Chinese Civil War had finally ended after more than 2 decades of intermittent conflict. But it left China divided in a way that continues to influence East Asian politics today. The communist victory represented far more than a change of government. It marked the triumph of rural over urban China, of revolutionary ideology over traditional authority, and of mass mobilization over elite politics. For the first time in over a century, China was unified under a strong central government committed to rapid modernization and social transformation. The stage was now set for the most ambitious experiment in human history, the attempt to transform the world's most populous nation into a modern socialist state. The establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 marked the beginning of one of the most tumultuous and transformative periods in Chinese history. Chairman Mao Zedong, now the undisputed leader of the world's most populous nation, embarked on an ambitious mission to rapidly transform China from a backward agricultural society into a modern socialist powerhouse. His vision would lead to some of the most dramatic social experiments ever attempted, with consequences that would reverberate through Chinese society for generations. By 1958, Mao felt confident enough in his position to launch what he called the Great Leap Forward, perhaps the most ambitious economic campaign in human history. The goal was breathtakingly simple yet impossibly complex: to surpass Britain in steel production within 15 years and transform China into an industrial giant virtually overnight. This was not merely an economic policy, but a revolutionary crusade that would mobilize the entire Chinese population in service of rapid modernization. The campaign began with tremendous fanfare and enthusiasm across the nation. Massive people's communes were established in rural areas, combining agriculture with industry in unprecedented ways. These communes, some containing up to 50,000 people, were designed to be self-sufficient units that could produce everything from grain to steel. Farmers were organized into military-style units and given ambitious production targets that seemed to defy the laws of economics and agriculture. In cities and villages alike, the iconic backyard furnaces became symbols of the Great Leap Forward's industrial ambitions. Millions of Chinese citizens melted down pots, pans, and any available metal to contribute to steel production targets. Children skipped school to tend these furnaces, while workers abandoned their regular jobs to participate in what was portrayed as a patriotic duty. The sight of smoke rising from countless small furnaces across China created an almost surreal landscape of industrial fervor. Agricultural policies during this period reflected Mao's belief that revolutionary enthusiasm could overcome natural limitations. Farmers were instructed to plant crops much closer together than traditional methods recommended, based on the theory that plants of the same species would not compete with each other. Deep plowing techniques were promoted, with some fields being dug to depths of several meters. Sparrow extermination campaigns were launched based on the belief that these birds were stealing grain that could feed the people. The results of these experimental methods were catastrophic beyond imagination. The close planting techniques led to crop failure on a massive scale, as plants indeed competed fiercely for nutrients and sunlight. Deep plowing destroyed soil structure in many regions, making future cultivation even more difficult. The elimination of sparrows disrupted ecological balance, leading to insect plagues that devastated remaining crops. Meanwhile, the backyard furnaces produced steel of such poor quality that it was essentially useless for industrial purposes. Local officials, terrified of disappointing Chairman Mao and facing severe punishment for failing to meet targets, began falsifying production reports on a massive scale. Villages that were actually experiencing severe food shortages reported bumper harvests to their superiors. Steel production figures were inflated dramatically, creating a false picture of success that reached the highest levels of government. This culture of deception meant that, when the crisis began to unfold, the central government remained largely unaware of the true situation for months. The failure of the Great Leap Forward led directly to what historians now recognize as one of the worst famines in human history. Between 1959 and 1961, an estimated 30 to 45 million Chinese people died from starvation and related diseases. This tragedy was not the result of natural disasters alone, but largely the consequence of misguided policies and the suppression of accurate information about their effects. In rural areas, the situation became desperate as early as 1959. Farmers who had been forced to abandon traditional agricultural methods watched their crops fail year after year. The communal dining halls that were supposed to demonstrate socialist abundance became symbols of scarcity as food rations grew smaller and smaller. People resorted to eating bark, grass, and anything else that might provide minimal nutrition. The psychological impact of the famine was as devastating as its physical toll. Families were torn apart as parents made impossible choices about how to distribute scarce food resources. Traditional social bonds weakened under the extreme pressure of survival, and reports emerged of previously unthinkable behaviors driven by desperation. The famine disproportionately affected rural areas, where the majority of China's population lived, while urban residents were somewhat better protected by government food distribution systems. The failure of the Great Leap Forward temporarily weakened Mao's position within the Communist Party. More pragmatic leaders like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping gained influence, implementing market-oriented policies to stabilize the economy and improve living conditions. These reforms, while successful in addressing immediate economic problems, represented a departure from Mao's vision of continuous revolution and ideological purity. By the mid-1960s, Mao had become increasingly concerned that China was drifting away from revolutionary principles and toward what he saw as capitalist restoration. He feared that a new class of bureaucrats and intellectuals was emerging that would eventually betray the socialist cause. His solution was characteristically radical: the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, launched in 1966. The Cultural Revolution was ostensibly aimed at purging capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society, but it quickly became a vehicle for Mao to reassert his authority and eliminate his political rivals. Young people, organized into groups called Red Guards, were encouraged to rebel against authority figures including teachers, parents, and local officials. Schools and universities were closed as students devoted themselves to revolutionary activities rather than academic study. The movement unleashed forces of chaos and violence that even Mao struggled to control. Red Guard units attacked anyone deemed insufficiently revolutionary, destroying cultural artifacts, historical sites, and traditional customs they viewed as remnants of the old society. Intellectuals, artists, and professionals were subjected to public humiliation, forced to confess their supposed crimes against the people. Many were sent to labor camps or rural areas for re-education through manual work. The Cultural Revolution represented the culmination of Mao's belief that continuous struggle was necessary to prevent the revolution from losing its momentum. However, the human cost of this philosophy was enormous, as Chinese society was convulsed by a decade of political persecution, economic disruption, and social fragmentation that would take generations to heal. The year 1976 marked a turning point in Chinese history with the death of Mao Zedong, but the real transformation began 2 years later when Deng Xiaoping emerged as China's paramount leader. Unlike his predecessor, who had emphasized ideological purity and revolutionary fervor, Deng brought a fundamentally different approach to governing China. His famous declaration that it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice, became the philosophical foundation for one of history's most dramatic economic transformations. Deng understood that China's survival and prosperity depended not on revolutionary slogans, but on practical results that would improve the lives of ordinary Chinese people. Deng's reforms began where they would have the most immediate impact: China's vast countryside, where over 80% of the population still lived. The People's Communes, Mao's grand experiment in collective agriculture, had proven to be an economic disaster that left hundreds of millions of farmers trapped in poverty. Deng dismantled this system and replaced it with the household responsibility system, which allowed individual families to farm their own plots of land. Under this new arrangement, farmers could keep or sell any surplus they produced after meeting state quotas, creating powerful incentives for increased productivity. The results were nothing short of miraculous, as agricultural output soared and rural incomes began rising for the first time in decades. Within just a few years, China had solved its chronic food shortages and millions of farmers experienced prosperity they had never known before. This success in agriculture provided the foundation for Deng's broader economic reforms and proved that market mechanisms could work within a socialist framework. Building on the success of rural reforms, Deng turned his attention to China's industrial sector and its relationship with the global economy. In 1980, he established special economic zones in 4 coastal cities: Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Ximen, with Shenzhen becoming the most famous example of China's transformation. These zones served as laboratories for market-oriented policies, offering tax incentives, reduced bureaucracy, and greater autonomy to attract foreign investment and technology. The transformation of Shenzhen from a sleepy fishing village of 30,000 people into a bustling metropolis of millions became the symbol of China's economic miracle. Foreign companies flocked to these zones, bringing with them advanced technology, management expertise, and access to global markets that Chinese enterprises desperately needed. The success of the special economic zones was so dramatic that Deng gradually expanded the policy to other coastal cities and eventually to much of the country. By the 1990s, China had become known as the world's factory, producing everything from textiles and toys to sophisticated electronics for consumers worldwide. This export-driven growth strategy, combined with domestic market reforms, fueled China's unprecedented economic ascent over the following decades. However, Deng's vision of reform had clear boundaries that became tragically apparent during the spring of 1989. As China's economy liberalized and opened to the world, many Chinese citizens, particularly students and intellectuals, began demanding political reforms to match the economic changes. The Tiananmen Square protests that began in April 1989 represented the largest challenge to Communist Party rule since the founding of the People's Republic. Students and workers gathered in Beijing's symbolic heart, calling for democracy, press freedom, and an end to government corruption. For weeks, the world watched as hundreds of thousands of protesters occupied the square, creating a powerful symbol of China's desire for political change. Deng faced an agonizing decision between his commitment to reform and his determination to maintain Communist Party control. On June 4, 1989, he chose to preserve party rule, ordering the military to clear the square by force in an action that shocked the international community. The violent suppression of the protests demonstrated that while Deng was willing to revolutionize China's economy, he would not tolerate challenges to the political system. Despite international condemnation following Tiananmen Square, Deng refused to abandon his reform agenda. In 1992, at the age of 87, he embarked on a historic southern tour, visiting the special economic zones to reaffirm China's commitment to market-oriented reforms. This tour was crucial in reinvigorating the reform process, which had stalled somewhat after the events of 1989. Deng's message was clear: China would continue on the path of economic liberalization and opening to the world, regardless of international criticism. His tour led to a new wave of reforms that further liberalized the economy and accelerated China's integration with global markets. The 1990s saw explosive growth as China attracted increasing amounts of foreign investment and became an ever more important player in international trade. Deng's pragmatic approach to foreign policy also helped China normalize relations with many countries and begin its journey toward becoming a global economic powerhouse. By the time of his death in 1997, Deng had fundamentally transformed China from an isolated, impoverished nation into a rapidly modernizing economy that would soon become the world's second largest. His legacy as the architect of modern China remains one of history's most remarkable examples of how visionary leadership and pragmatic policies can transform an entire civilization. The closing decades of the 20th century witnessed one of history's most remarkable diplomatic achievements, as China successfully negotiated the peaceful return of Hong Kong and Macau to Chinese sovereignty. This unprecedented experiment in governance, known as one country, two systems, would test China's ability to balance unity with diversity while managing the complex transition from colonial rule to Chinese administration. The story of these handovers represents far more than simple territorial transfers. They symbolize China's emergence from the century of humiliation and its evolution into a sophisticated global power capable of innovative diplomatic solutions. Hong Kong's journey back to China began in the early 1980s when British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher visited Beijing to discuss the territory's future. The lease on the new territories, which comprised the majority of Hong Kong's land area, was set to expire in 1997, creating an urgent need for resolution. Deng Xiaoping, demonstrating his characteristic pragmatism, proposed an innovative solution that would allow Hong Kong to maintain its capitalist system and way of life for 50 years after the handover. This concept of one country, two systems was revolutionary in its scope and ambition. Under this framework, Hong Kong would become a special administrative region of China, retaining its own legal system, currency, and civil liberties while acknowledging Chinese sovereignty. The negotiations were complex and delicate, requiring careful balance between British concerns about Hong Kong's future prosperity and Chinese determination to reclaim lost territory. The Sino-British Joint Declaration, signed in 1984, codified these arrangements and provided international legal framework for the transition. This agreement represented a triumph of diplomacy over confrontation, avoiding the potential for conflict while addressing the legitimate interests of all parties involved. The years leading up to 1997 were marked by intensive preparation as both British and Chinese officials worked to ensure a smooth transition. Hong Kong's business community, initially nervous about the change, gradually gained confidence as China demonstrated its commitment to preserving the territory's economic autonomy. The handover ceremony on July 1, 1997, was a moment of profound historical significance watched by millions around the world. As midnight approached, Prince Charles and Chinese President Jiang Zemin presided over the formal transfer of sovereignty in a ceremony that was both solemn and celebratory. The lowering of the Union Jack and the raising of the Chinese flag marked the end of 155 years of British colonial rule and the beginning of a new chapter in Hong Kong's history. For many Hong Kong residents, the moment was deeply emotional, a mixture of pride in returning to the motherland and uncertainty about what the future would hold. The ceremony itself was carefully choreographed to emphasize continuity and stability, with Chinese leaders making reassuring statements about their commitment to the one country, two systems principle. The presence of international media and dignitaries underscored the global significance of the event and China's desire to demonstrate its capacity for responsible governance. In the immediate aftermath of the handover, Hong Kong continued to function much as it had before, with its stock market, legal system, and press freedom remaining largely intact. This smooth transition helped validate the one country, two systems model and demonstrated China's growing sophistication in managing complex political arrangements. 2 years later, on December 20, 1999, Macau followed Hong Kong's path back to Chinese sovereignty in an even more peaceful and ceremonial transition. Unlike Hong Kong, which had been ceded to Britain in perpetuity, Macau had always been recognized as Chinese territory under Portuguese administration, making its return less controversial. The handover ceremony was attended by Portuguese President Jorge Sampaio and Chinese President Jiang Zemin, symbolizing the friendly relations between the two nations. Macau's transition was smoother than Hong Kong's, partly because of lessons learned from the earlier handover, and partly because of the territory's smaller size and different economic structure. The former Portuguese colony embraced its new role enthusiastically, with its casino industry experiencing unprecedented growth under Chinese rule. Within a few years, Macau had surpassed Las Vegas as the world's largest gambling destination, generating enormous revenues that benefited both the local population and the Chinese government. The success of Macau's integration demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability of the one country, two systems model when applied to different contexts and circumstances. The successful handovers of Hong Kong and Macau marked a watershed moment in China's modern history, representing the peaceful resolution of historical grievances through diplomatic negotiation rather than military force. These achievements enhanced China's international reputation and demonstrated its capacity for innovative governance solutions that respected local autonomy while maintaining national unity. The one country, two systems model became a template that Chinese leaders hoped might eventually be applied to Taiwan's reunification with the mainland. However, the long-term success of this arrangement would depend on China's ability to maintain the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy as both territories evolved and changed. The handovers also marked China's full emergence as a major global power, capable of managing complex international relationships and honoring its commitments to the international community. As the 21st century began, these peaceful transitions stood as testament to China's transformation from a revolutionary state focused on ideology to a mature nation capable of pragmatic diplomacy and sophisticated governance. China stepped onto the global stage as a rising power, and its handling of these former colonies would be closely watched by the international community. The success or failure of the one country, two systems model in Hong Kong and Macau would have implications far beyond their borders, potentially influencing China's approach to other territorial disputes and its broader foreign policy. As the new millennium dawned, China emerged as a global powerhouse, reshaping the world order and challenging long-held assumptions about economic and political development. The country's meteoric rise was driven by a unique blend of state-directed capitalism and authoritarian governance, a model that came to be known as socialism with Chinese characteristics. This distinctive approach represented decades of careful experimentation and adaptation, building upon the economic reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping while maintaining the Communist Party's political monopoly. Under the leadership of Hu Jintao and later Xi Jinping, China pursued ambitious reforms that solidified its position as the world's second-largest economy. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable, with robust growth fueled by manufacturing, export sports, and technological innovation creating an economic miracle that lifted hundreds of millions from poverty. China's integration into the global economy accelerated dramatically with its entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. This watershed moment opened the floodgates for foreign investment and trade, propelling China's economic modernization to unprecedented heights. The WTO membership represented China's commitment to playing by international rules while simultaneously providing access to global markets that would fuel its extraordinary growth. Cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing transformed into gleaming metropolises, their skylines dotted with futuristic skyscrapers that symbolized China's rapid urbanization and economic prowess. These urban centers became magnets for both domestic migration and international business, creating dynamic hubs of commerce and innovation that rivaled any in the world. As hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens were lifted out of poverty, the country's middle class swelled dramatically, creating a vast consumer market that attracted businesses from around the world. This expanding middle class not only drove domestic consumption, but also began to influence global trends in everything from luxury goods to technology preferences. But China's ambitions extended far beyond its borders, reflecting a growing confidence in its ability to shape global affairs. In 2013, President Xi Jinping unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive global infrastructure and investment project aimed at enhancing connectivity across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This modern-day Silk Road sought to cement China's position as a global leader, expanding its economic and political influence through a web of railways, ports, and trade agreements spanning continents. The initiative, while met with both enthusiasm and skepticism internationally, signaled China's intention to reshape global trade patterns and geopolitical alignments in ways not seen since the original Silk Road connected East and West centuries ago. On the technological front, China made significant strides, positioning itself as a leader in cutting-edge fields that would define the future of human civilization. The nation poured unprecedented resources into artificial intelligence, 5G networks, and renewable energy, seeking to dominate the industries of the future and reduce its dependence on foreign technology. Chinese companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent became global tech giants, challenging the dominance of Silicon Valley and proving that innovation could flourish under different political and economic systems. These companies not only served China's massive domestic market, but also expanded internationally, bringing Chinese technology and business practices to markets around the world. In space exploration, China achieved notable successes with its Chang lunar missions and the development of its own space station, joining an elite club of space-faring nations. These achievements symbolized China's growing technological sophistication and its determination to compete with established powers in every arena of human endeavor. However, China's rise was not without its challenges and controversies that would test both its domestic stability and international relationships. Politically, the country maintained authoritarian control under the Communist Party, with Xi Jinping consolidating power in ways unseen since the days of Mao Zedong. The removal of presidential term limits in 2018 signaled a shift away from the collective leadership model of previous decades, raising questions about the future direction of Chinese governance and the concentration of power in a single leader. China's growing assertiveness on the global stage led to increasing geopolitical tensions, particularly with the United States, as two superpowers grappled with questions of global leadership and influence. Trade disputes escalated into a full-blown trade war as both nations grappled with issues of market access, intellectual property rights, and technological competition that would reshape global commerce. China's territorial claims in the South China Sea and its stance on Taiwan became flashpoints in international relations, while human rights concerns in regions like Xinjiang and Hong Kong drew widespread criticism from the international community. The one country, two systems model, initially designed for Hong Kong and Macau, faced its greatest test in 2019 when Hong Kong experienced its largest protests since the handover. Millions took to the streets opposing a proposed extradition bill and expressing broader concerns about eroding autonomy under Chinese rule. Beijing's response, including the implementation of a national security law in 2020, signaled a tightening grip on the former British colony and raised questions about the future of civil liberties in the region. China's journey from its ancient roots along the Yellow River to becoming a global superpower is a story of resilience and transformation that continues to unfold. The balance between tradition and innovation has shaped a culture that influences the world today. As China navigates the complex challenges of maintaining domestic stability while asserting its place on the global stage. As China moves forward into an uncertain future, its history will continue to offer valuable lessons on global dynamics, the nature of power, and the endless human capacity for reinvention and growth.